Good morning, everybody. I hope everyone's had a good night's sleep. Members, the committee has resumed on the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill. When we were considering the bill last night, we were debating Part 1. The Part 1, just to remind everyone, is the debate on clauses 4 to 19, substantive amendments. The question is that Part 1 stand part.
Madam Chair.
I call the Honourable Louise Upstill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to address a question that was raised last night by the Honourable Willie Jackson around consultation with Māori, and just to confirm that the Tangata Whenua Social Workers Association was engaged with the amendments in this bill.
I call Helen White.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask the Minister about a couple of things. The first is one that the Honourable Willie Jackson started to talk about last night, which was clause section 116, which is the membership of the Tribunal. I have noticed something in that which I'm not sure is correct, and that is at subsection 2. It says a person referred to in the subsection must be a barrister or solicitor of the High Court of not less than 7 years. Now, I was actually going to ask about the 7 years issue, but I've also noticed that, as part of the bar, you are a barrister and a solicitor in New Zealand, and this is a barrister or solicitor. I totally appreciate that in layperson's talk, you are one or the other. I ended up being exclusively a barrister, but I was still registered on the roll of barristers and solicitors of the High Court because we have a fused bar. So I do wonder if that is just perhaps an error that needs correcting. I'd also like to ask about the 7 years practice and what kind of field of expertise those barristers and solicitors will be drawn from, because it does seem that this is an area which specific knowledge, and I appreciate there are 5 other social workers in the mix here, but this is an area where a knowledge of some areas of law will do you no good whatsoever, and there will need to be some specific knowledge. Now, it doesn't mean that can't happen under this law and that isn't the role of the selection process, but I would like to know, what is that selection process? How will that work? Who will be involved in making those decisions? And I also want just to ask a very separate question about Section 11, the revocation of suspension or change of the individual scope of practice. Now, none of us have spoken about that in our speeches, and I can see the point here that you need to be able to not only make the decisions but revoke them. But I would invite the Minister to comment on that section so that it's highlighted for the public. I have already asked a question about the reasonableness of any further suspension, just because the person in the Minister's chair has changed. I thought I'd just repeat that. It's just about what are the parameters of reasonable and necessary in terms of extending a suspension. I appreciate the need for more flexibility. Was there a decision made that was something that needed to be very much on a case-by-case basis? And what kind of checks and balances are there in there for something that might be an abuse of that process? We've had in the past situations where people have been on suspension for enormous amounts of time. That setting changes, in my My experience as an employment lawyer, it changes a lot if you're being paid or unpaid. This particular act has nothing to do with those settings. So presumably you could have people who are not being paid at all on a long term of suspension because it was deemed reasonable and necessary. And so what is the guidance from the Minister as to how that clause would work? Thank you.
I call Glenn Bennett.
Kia ora, Madam Chair, and it's it's good to be able to speak on this piece of legislation and look at part one. Sorry, as we're here on the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill, and I was looking back, and I'm looking at section 3 around amending the purpose, and there's a couple of things in there, and I was looking at the original Act. And could see the purpose, which is quite clear. And I think it makes sense to me, but I just want clarification because, I'll be honest, I'm a simple kind of person. But in section 3, it amends the purpose and it'll replace consider complaints about social workers, and that'll be replaced with exercise the disciplinary powers over social workers conferred by this Act. Now, I'm just trying to, get clarity on why this is important, because I don't think it changes it a lot, but I'm just trying to understand, because on the one hand, we're replacing to consider complaints about social workers and we're replacing that with exercising disciplinary powers. Now, they can mean similar things, but obviously the purpose of those two statements can actually be, because one is exercising something and one is considering something. So I'm wondering if the Minister can explain why they landed on this change, what it actually means for social workers registration, because as we know, we look at this, and across the House I am assuming that people know this is important, that this is something that's reviewed every 5 years, that we come into the space to look at, and that we need obviously to value our social workers, but also to make sure we get it right, because they are working with our most vulnerable, our young people, our elderly, our sick, those in prisons, those in state care, etc., etc. So section 3, the amendment here changes it from considering complaints to exercising disciplinary powers.
Got that.
So we'll make that clear. The second part, thank you, Madam Chair. Second is, I did have a good sleep, but it wasn't long enough, was it? I was like, was it in my head or was I saying that out loud? And the second part is, and again, I don't know if there's much difference here, but in section 6, where it says to amend section 6(1)(c) II, which is to replace different with various. Now, so it goes from different ethnic cultural groups to various ethnic cultural groups. Now, it just seems like semantics to me, but why is that important? What is the difference it makes? So looking up the different words, why would we change it? What would the emphasis be to be various cultural groups rather than different cultural groups? And I guess maybe just for the benefit of the House, because as we progress as a nation, as we progress in terms of being more diverse, more inclusive, and things like, I'm glad we're changing the language, removing, it moves on further when we're removing some of that binary language, but the fact that we're changing it from different ethnic cultural groups to various ethnic cultural groups, and why is that important, and why does that make a difference? Thank you.
Madam Chair.
The Honourable Louise Upston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just do want to remind the House this is a bill that was supported unanimously, only 5 submissions, and many of the changes are technical, including the change to the purpose that the member just mentioned. In terms of the previous questions around the Tribunal, 7 years is standard, that's not changing, or it's not different from other tribunals. And in terms of the selection of the members, it will have to be people who've got the skills and expertise to be able to make rulings in this type of tribunal. So there's nothing really complicated or unusual here, hence the fact there were only 5 submissions.
I call the Honourable Jenny Salisa.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask the Minister a question, and as she points out, this Social Workers Registration Bill is unanimously supported. But can I just ask the Minister, please, and this is in relation to Section 6, subsection 1C, subsection 2, following on from my colleague Glenn Bennett, replacing the word different with the word various. What is the rationale for changing the word different and replacing it with various, and how does this impact the recognition of ethnic diversity in the social work profession? And I ask this Minister as spokesperson for Labour for ethnic communities, as well as the chair of our Labour Pacific Caucus. Does the government acknowledge that different suggests different identities, whereas various may dilute the recognition of specific cultural needs? And how will this wording affect the recognition of Pacific, Māori and ethnic social workers?
Madam Chair.
Honourable Louise Upston.
As I said, this is just a number of technical matters. When bills are changed like this, they reflect the language that the Parliamentary Council Office recommend, and that's been used with modern drafting techniques. To the member's specific question, it actually helps to remove the possible perception of marginalisation.
Lawrence Sunan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for the Minister regarding Section 4 of Part 1, Section 3 amended, the purpose. Now, understanding that under Section 3B2 of the Principal Act, it previously was only considering complaints about social worker, but now has expanded to include exercise of disciplinary powers. I want to check under the Principal Act Part 5 in terms of appeal and the right to appeal, would that encompass the broadening of the power that this section will have? As in, for a person to have the right of appeal, can they also in that case appeal the additional exercise of the disciplinary powers on top of the complaints? So for clarity, so this is obviously in this bill, it is Section 4 of the Section 3 amended, but if you look at the principal bill, which is the Social Workers Registration Act, it is 3B Roman numeral 2, but also in that Principal Act under Part 5, there is a section on appeal. So I wanted to check with the Minister if that right to appeal expands to the additional powers.
For the members' information, that particular section has been already addressed in
As Part 1?
Yes.
So the question on appeal has already been addressed?
It was raised, yes,
okay,
by the previous questioner. I call David McLeod.
I move that debate on this question now close.
The question is that debate on this the question is that debate on this question now close. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. A party vote is called for, Mr Clark.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
6 votes opposed.
Members, the ayes are 68, the noes are 55. The question is agreed to. The question is that Part 1 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we now come to Part 2, which is the debate on clauses 20 to 23, other amendments, and schedules 1 to 3. The question is that Part 2 stand part. The question is that Part 2 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Our party vote is called for, Mr Clark. Sorry, I'd already started to put that question.
Apologies, I have the wrong Well, we've got the vote now anyway. I made a mistake.
I'm not calling a party vote? Okay. Oh.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Point of order. Sorry, Madam Chair.
Point of order, Lawrence Hunan.
Thank you.
We're actually undertaking a vote.
Oh, can we raise it afterwards?
Does it affect the vote?
Yes, I'm just seeking clarity for the vote. My apologies. I'm seeking the vote. I'm seeking clarification on whether the vote is on the Part 2 stand part or on the fact of whether we are considering the closing of the question.
It is. The question is that Part 2 stand part.
Okay. In that case, when we are in support of the bill, so we do not need to call for a party vote.
Thank you. So just to be clear, the question is that Part 2 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. We now come to Schedule 1. The question is that Schedule 1 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. We come to question 2, Schedule 2. The question is that Schedule 2 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Schedule 3. The question is that the Minister's tabled amendment to Schedule 3 be agreed to. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Schedule 3, as amended, stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we now come to clauses 1 to 3. This is the debate on title, commencement and principal act. The question is that clause 1 stand part. Oh, sorry. Yes. I called Glenn Bennett.
Good, Madam Chair.
It's been a short night.
And it's still Tuesday, so I understand it's been a long day. Madam Chair, just looking at the title, which, there seems no real need to change it, so to be honest, I agree with that. I just wanted clarity in terms of the commencement date. So this will come into force on the 1st of July 2025. Just what is the significance of that date? Is that 3 months from today, top of my head, is it? But is that the reason, and is it, normally it's, that was really my question, was just to understand the date, because we're moving forward, want to make it happen, is this within the legislative framework of it is generally a 3-month process, or is there another reason for that? Just so we can be clear that is set things in place and that all parts of, for the Social Workers Registration Board, for the work that's done, that they will be up to speed and able to implement the changes that have been made in this technical piece of legislation.
Madam Chair.
The Honourable Louise Upston.
1st of July is a fairly standard date for legislation. It's the first part of the next half year, and it just allows sufficient time for the changes to be put in place.
Lawrence Hunan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister, for that response in terms of the commencement date. Can I just check? So the Minister then is confident that, for example, if we're looking at Section 18 and 19, in terms of switching over the power from the previous CE to the board system, that the Minister is confident that appointment process as well as the transition power will be complete under the new Section 116? Oh, I think the Minister is kidding. Oh, yeah. Is that a nod? That's saying yes or no that you acknowledge the question?
Madam Chair, just to clarify, Royal Assent is the date in which most of the provisions come into place, but for other measures, the 1st of July to allow the transfer of those functions to occur. There's nothing surprising here.
Okay. I've got my papers. Thank you. Members, the question is that Clause 1 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 2 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 3 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I will report this bill with amendment.
The House is resumed.
Madam Speaker, the committee has considered the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill and reports it with amendment. Madam Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the report be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The bill is set down for third reading immediately. Honourable Louise Upston.
Madam Speaker, I present a legislative statement on the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill and move that the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill be now read a third time.
That legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website. Honourable Louise Upston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to begin by acknowledging the vital support that social workers provide to some of our most vulnerable populations across New Zealand. They support their communities to ensure that people receive the assistance they need to live safe and fulfilling lives. The bill amends the Social Workers Registration Act 2003 to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of operations carried out under the Act. Collectively, the changes these amendments make will help ensure the Act is fit for purpose and support social workers to uphold their professional standards while delivering safe care to their communities. It highlights our government's commitment to enhancing the social work profession and is a way to ensure that social workers are supported to serve our communities safely and effectively. Madam Speaker, I want to just take a moment to quickly outline the 6 policy amendments in this bill. The first amendment broadens the grounds for interim suspension. Action will be able to be taken when a formal investigation is considered but not yet started. When there is sufficient evidence to believe an investigation is likely to begin, social workers will be able to be suspended in the period before the formal investigation starts. This change prioritises, of course, public safety, as people would expect, while at the same time addressing concerns about the social workers' professionalism or practice, while ensuring that the suspensions meet the criteria to maintain fairness. This change would reduce public safety risk to those served by social workers, keeping our communities safer. Another amendment allows for the extension of additional interim suspension periods from 10 days to a period that is reasonable and necessary for the board to complete their investigation. Currently, the suspended social workers receive notices every 10 days, even when there's no change to their status, despite some investigations taking up to the average length, which is approximately 17 months. So, of course, it will just help manage communication more effectively, reducing any unnecessary stress from those repeated interim suspension notices, while ensuring that the correct process is maintained. The bill also ensures that the board's Professional Conduct Committee will also become more efficient and flexible. An amendment will allow the committee to combine available outcomes for complaints or notices of conviction, rather than being limited to one per case, allowing complex cases to be processed more effectively. To improve efficiency, another amendment will allow the board to delegate its registration functions to employed staff. This change will reduce delays in the registration processes for applicants seeking social worker registration and would free up the board's appointed members to prioritise their responsibilities and governance. The fifth amendment clarifies the board's role in monitoring prescribed educational qualifications. While this function is already implied, this amendment would make it explicit in law and remove any ambiguity about the board's responsibility to monitor the social workers' qualifications that it prescribes. And finally, the bill will transfer the power to obtain information for investigating individuals who falsely claim to be registered social workers or who practice as a social worker without authorisation from the Ministry of Social Development to the board. Shifting this function to the board ensures there's a single point of contact for the public. In addition, the 11 technical amendments to the bill will address inconsistencies in the Act, streamlines its operations and update the language used. This aligns the Act with wider changes in how social workers are governed and contributes to enhancing the professionalism of the workforce. There were a couple of concerns that were raised in the Select Committee and they were out of scope of the bill. But I do acknowledge, Madam Speaker, that social work shortages remain a concern for many. This has also been highlighted during the Select Committee process, and I acknowledge the challenges that that presents, both for the workforce but also for the people they serve. So work is underway to address those concerns, and I thought I would take the opportunity just to confirm that the board is starting to engage the sector on a workforce strategy and action plan. Madam Speaker, these amendments I have outlined today will help to ensure that social workers are able to effectively deliver critical services to some of our most vulnerable populations across the country. As this bill goes through the third reading, I want to thank the Social Workers Registration Board for their work on the 2020 review of the Act, which has of course led to the amendments that we're discussing today. And I want to thank the Social Services and Community Select Committee members for their review and their work on this piece of legislation. Thanks to the submitters and a very big thank you to the officials who work tirelessly to ensure that the legislative changes we bring to this House will work. My final thanks, though, go to the social workers for the essential work they do in our communities, often in very challenging circumstances and dealing with New Zealanders that have very complex circumstances in their lives. I know that this bill will assist them and support their efforts and ensure the professional standards that they uphold each and every day. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call Glenn Bennett.
Kia ora, Madam Speaker, and it is with thoughtfulness that I stand and make a call on this piece of legislation and acknowledge in the last term of Parliament actually that you, Madam Speaker, and I were on the Social Services and Community Select Committee and got to spend many a time engaging with social workers with legislation that is important to the lifeblood of our communities and of our people throughout Aotearoa, New Zealand. And when I look at this piece of legislation, the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill, it is a simple technical bill, but is one that we should always take seriously, one that we should always be considered on, because our social workers play a huge role within our communities, within our schools, within our prisons, within our aged care facilities, within our healthcare facilities, within communities, all across the country. And I'm sure I've missed many a part of where they involve themselves. And I was thinking, Madam Speaker, about the role of a social worker as we looked at this, because very much I believe legislation like this is around protection. It's around protecting not only the people that social workers work with, but it's around protecting the social workers themselves. And we need to fiercely protect our social workers, that there are checks and balances in place for them, so that we ensure that they know the rules, they know the boundaries, but there are checks and balances like the Social Workers Registration Board that can be considered to make sure that we have the best people in the best places doing everything they can for our beautiful tamariki, our elderly, those in need, those who need support. And as I looked at the bill and as we're listening through the stages over the last wee while, I was thinking, what actually is a social worker? You know, we generally know what they are on paper. We kind of have an idea. You know, social worker, they interact and often in dynamic circumstances and that sort of thing. But I just wanted to reflect as we consider this legislation, what a social worker is and what actually they do. A social worker is an advocate. They're an advocate not only for a person, but it might be for a whānau and for a community. They're a supporter, they're an empower, they're a listener. And in many ways we look around our fast-paced world and the disconnection that has happened in many parts of society. And often a social worker is at a place where someone maybe it is at their most neediest point within their lives. And a social worker is there not only to be an advocate and a supporter, but to be a listener where they may never have been listened to before in that community or with that person. They're a protector, they're a guide, they're a connector, they're a healer, they're an ally, and they're a problem solver. And I think that's one of the things that as a society we need to acknowledge and celebrate within our social work community. They are problem solvers. Every single day they go to work to love people, to care for people, to be allies and advocates and supporters, but to solve problems when often people have got to their wits' end and don't know where to go or what to do. And we need to celebrate, acknowledge and ensure that our social workers are not only resourced, but they are protected. And as I look at this legislation, and yeah, it is technical, and yes, we do support it, but we also need to be reminded of the challenges within the social sector we have at the moment. The challenges we face with funding, the challenges we face with staffing, the challenges we face when it seems that a government doesn't seem to care about what they are doing to ensure that our social workers are the best they can be and are the most well-resourced that they can be. If we look at funding cuts, if we look at our workforce in terms of the percentage of people going through training and education to become social workers, the reduced hours and the challenges that many social workers are facing, as well as the fact that many of our social workers are ageing. And I was looking at the numbers, around 40% of our current social workers are Pākehā New Zealanders. They're actually not completely representative of the people they're working with. And I believe that we need to be looking as a government, as a parliament, and as society, how do we ensure diversity and inclusion? How do we ensure that we make sure the people who are connecting and working with our communities look like themselves, sound like themselves? How do we make sure that we are putting the right funding and the right systems in place to empower our social workers to love and care for our communities, but also be representative of them? And it is disappointing, Madam Speaker, when I look at the pay equity settlements for social workers and the fact that it feels like it's stalled and it's not going anywhere. When I look at the fact that the cuts to oranga tamariki, what's going on, and the implication that has not only for our social workers and those who are doing the best that they can do, but of course it affects our tamariki, it affects our whānau, it affects our communities, and that is not okay as a society, and that is not okay that we in this Parliament allow that to happen. Madam Speaker, this legislation is important, but we also need to be critical and look beyond just what we're talking about.
Not for the purposes of this debate.
Which was, my next sentence was I understand. There's a parameter within this, Madam Speaker, but we need to be looking at the big picture as well, because we can't look at just a piece of legislation in isolation. We've got to look at it beyond that in terms of where it fits into society. So we need to get our social worker work strategy right. We need a plan. And it's hard to look and see what is going on when it feels like this government does not have a plan for our most vulnerable, that our government does not have a plan to fund, to equip, to empower, to resource our social work sector, to resource our community sector, to resource oranga tamariki. And we need to look at this legislation today as we are, but we have to look beyond that to see what we're doing to get it right. Madam Speaker, social workers are problem solvers, and we in this House need to be problem solvers too. And how can we work? How can we challenge the government to look at how they're funding things, and that people actually are more important than profits? That if we don't have people, if we don't actually have people in the right places, then what is the point of having profits? Madam Speaker, social workers are change makers. Social workers are carers. Social workers are mediators. Social workers often are responders and often end up being first responders because they can see the situation and what is going on and what needs to be done. They're counsellors, they're community builders, and they are a voice. They are a voice for our community. They are a voice for society. And we need to value them. This legislation makes some tweaks, which we agree with, which is good, to protect, as I said, our social workers, to protect those they work with, just to continue to modernise. But also, social workers are a voice that should be speaking into every single electorate, into every single MP's office, allowing us to understand what are the critical needs at the grassroots of our communities. And if we were listening as MPs, if we were paying attention, if we were meeting with them, if we were reading the emails that they are sending us, we know that there is a crisis in our country. There is a crisis of community. There is a crisis of funding. and there is a crisis of ensuring that the social work workforce is equipped, we have the right people with the right expertise and the right training. And Madam Speaker, we need to get this right. In closing, I just want to point out a couple of changes that are being made. And I asked the Minister during the Committee of the Whole House just regarding a simple word change. And I know one of my colleagues, the Honourable Jenny Salisa, who also spoke on this, the changing the word from different ethnic and cultural groups with the reference to various. And I actually, when I got my dictionary out, had a look, and realised that actually it does make sense, because I think it's more inclusive, it allows more engagement. Different, we talk about difference, that's I'm different to you, whereas various is actually far more inclusive and brings more people to the table. And so actually, when I looked at it, when I asked the Minister, when I read and understood, I feel comfortable, and actually, yeah, I think it's a good thing. We need to look at various, not just at differences, but what brings us together. And of course then, Madam Speaker, there's replacing the term such as he or she with gender neutral terminology. And that's just simple stuff. That's actually just allowing, making a modernisation which allows for legislation to move into the 21st century and beyond. Madam Speaker, our social workers are amazing advocates. They're fighters, they're champions for whānau, for young people, for elderly, for our communities. They are people who need to be honoured, who need to be paid correctly, who need to be resourced, who need to be trained, and we must, from this House, support our social work whānau.
I call Ricardo Menendez-March.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak on the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill on its third reading. As I've noted in the previous readings and others have commented, this is about tightening the frameworks that we have to ensure that social workers can be both looked after, but also there's a level of accountability when things don't go right. This bill also does a lot of updating when it comes to language. I think that's, like others have noted, about modernising the language in our legislation. And this is important particularly, both as others have noted in the language around the gendered references. So in the Schedule 3, a lot of what this bill is doing is actually changing things like he or she to just actually say social workers. That's actually, I think, really, really valuable because at the end of the day, what we do have is a growing and a diverse workforce in the social worker sphere. We do have more queer people in the social worker profession. Having gender neutral language actually includes non-binary people and gender diverse people in here, which is great that the government's actually getting on board with modernising legislation to be more inclusive of queer people who are part of the social worker profession. I encourage them to take this inclusive approach more broadly when it comes to other pieces of legislation. So this feels like a breath of fresh air when it comes to actually modernising legislation, because at the end of the day, the core of this legislation does a bunch of other things. The core of this legislation is actually about tightening the screws when it comes to the accountability that social workers face. But there is an opportunity being taken in Schedule 3 particularly, and Schedule 2 when it comes to how we talk about ethnicity, to modernise things. This is something that actually I think the government could take the opportunity to review and do when they're doing other amendments to pieces of legislation to modernise them, to actually think about whether the language that we've been using in legislation is up to date, that it actually reflects today's society. More broadly, I think I want to also commend the profession, because what we have right now is social workers that are working under the pump. Many of them, the pipeline of training includes many low-income people who go into the profession to serve their own communities, who many are struggling to make ends meet while they are studying. What this means actually in practice is we've got people who may come from the lived experience of being in low incomes, of struggling to make ends meet, and yet they go into a profession that is overworked, under-resourced, and when we have the combination of people at the front lines helping others do their best, and yet they're under-resourced, actually we set them up to fail and we create the conditions for mistakes to happen. So as I have raised in other contributions on this bill, I think it's critical that alongside this bill, that to better actually have accountability mechanisms, the government genuinely invests in resourcing and improving the conditions, the working conditions of social workers, so that we actually set them up to be their best, to avoid overworking and underpaying, which leads to our social workers being stressed and tired and more likely to land themselves in the very same things that the bill is trying to tighten and to improve, which is those accountability mechanisms that exist for when things don't go right. So I'm thinking of a few things the government can do after finishing the third reading of this bill to improve the social worker profession. One of them is commit to improving the wages of social workers that are working in the NGO sector and in the public sector as well. Many of our social workers do their placements at, for example, Oranga Tamariki, then they go to work on those very same agencies. But their wages actually still mean that they struggle to make ends meet. Another thing that the government can do after the third reading of this bill to make sure that the intent of this bill works is to actually explore things like paid placements, to ensure that actually while social workers are learning, they're actually getting paid. What that means is, and I say this as somebody who was a field educator for social workers before becoming an MP, is that we ensure that when social workers are doing their training out in the field, they don't have to work multiple jobs to make ends meet, and they can focus on learning to ensure that they don't land themselves in the very same bodies that this bill is trying to make amendments to and change the language around, to ensure actually that on the other side, when we do have someone working alongside a social worker who is being failed by a social worker, because it can happen and it does happen, and the consequences are often dire when it does happen, that we were able to reduce those things. Because you know, if we take out sort of the legislative jargon and talk about, I guess, the real life implications of what this bill is trying to do, it's about when, for example, if a social worker is trying to support someone who's homeless, if the social worker is trying to support someone get onto the right benefit or navigate a really complex situation with their families in relationship to Oranga Tamariki, if the social worker isn't able to act competently for the person on the other side, it can be the difference between, for example, being connected to their communities, or, for example, bless you, or it can also be the difference between not having a home. And so I think, to me, this is why it's really, really important that the government gets this right, because we support the intent of this bill. We support modernizing the very same bodies that allow social workers to be looked after. And to have clarity around the level of accountability that social workers face. But as I've said earlier, there's so much more than social workers can be supported to make sure that they're at their best. I did want to talk a bit about the Schedule 2 components of this bill. I think the Honourable Jenny Salesa talked a bit about that in the Committee of the Whole House. A lot of this is about, for example, changing language such as different to various when it comes to ethnicity. I think that's important to reflect that actually different can be othering, and so we have to be intentional when it comes to the language we use in pieces of legislation. If there's a place where language matters the most, it's actually how we write laws. So I think this is quite like not just symbolic, but an intentional way of actually reflecting a growing and diverse workforce, particularly because recently the House updated, or more like extended, the experience pathways for social workers to be able to be registered. And that was with the intent of actually ensuring that we can have more Māori and Pacifica and for example, migrant background social workers in the field. And therefore the stuff that we have in Schedule 2 is, I think, also a recognition of this government's, and actually with the support of the opposition, and ensuring that we do have those pathways for a more diverse workforce to enter into social work. So that's on Schedule 2 and the changes to the language. Going back to updating gender references in Schedule 3, I think I really encourage the government to review the pieces of legislation where we do have that, because it's also about, it's not just it is about including, for example, non-binary people, but it's actually just about making that language clear. Like, why would we have language that says repetitively he or she when we actually are referring to a very specific type of profession and person. So I think the change to, for example, he or she to the applicant, or he or she to, for example, the social worker, is just common sense. Because actually what it does is that if you're somebody reading a piece of legislation and you're an everyday person in the public, what it means is that you're looking at the paper in front of you and you know exactly what the legislation and the schedule is actually referring to. In many cases, it's not just referring to he or she, it's referring to a social worker. So that's, I think, a really intentional piece that I wanted to go back to. Finally, I want to say that, the other area that the government should be looking at post the third reading debate, and this is something that I think has been raised with me, and I'm sure with others, in relationship to the social worker field, is how our tertiary institutions are resourced to adequately be able to train social workers. There's been a lot of talk about the curriculum and how we ensure that social workers are adequately supported by those institutions. That has consequential impacts and a direct impact actually in what this bill is trying to do. One of the things I have noted, for example, is that at the moment, because of that under-resourcing, many social workers aren't even trained to properly understand and navigate things like work and income. And that is reflected in the field. Many volunteer organizations are working, for example, with social workers who did not receive adequate training to understand the systems of work and income. I have had social workers on the clock being brought to organizations that have volunteers, to have volunteers explain to them how work and income works. That's not their fault. It's actually the broader system that ends up failing our social workers. And so, once again, if we want to make sure that our social workers are deployed in the field in the most competent and supported way possible to avoid them landing into the very same accountability mechanisms that we have that this bill is trying to improve, supporting them in their training and in the field is critical to that. So with that, we commend this bill to the House, and we hope that the government takes further actions to support social workers.
Laura McClure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I rise on the third reading of the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill in support from the ACT Party. And I think this topic has been well canvassed. It's based on a review back in 2020, extremely sensible to have a review of legislation and tidy it up where appropriate. And I firstly just want to actually shout out to the social workers, because these guys are out there every day, and I know I've got some family and some friends that have been with our most vulnerable children overnight on a night shift, getting home and then dropping their own kids off at school. And so I just want to say I acknowledge you and I see you this morning, and thank you so much for your hard work, and I commend this bill to the House.
Speaker.
I call Tanya
That's all right. Tanya Onkovich is my name. Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of New Zealand First, I stand in support of the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill. Last night, during our contributions, I wanted to acknowledge all of the social workers out there for everything they'd done. It was really great to hear the support from the other side. A little bit disappointing to hear a member on the other side use the reading of this bill to try and roast our party. I had the benefit of the mute button on my remote control in my office. I also troublemaker. Oh yes, no. And then I believe the member opposite also went on to say that they didn't think that anyone on this side of the House probably even knew a social worker. I'm not sure the exact wording. Well, part of the prerequisite of obtaining my diploma in counselling was obtaining a certificate in social work. I've spent many hours listening to people who are suffering, and I know what suffering tastes and feels like. So I would like to just say that members on this side, there is always a story behind the face. So just a wee lesson there. On that note, Madam Speaker, there's nothing more to add. We've all said enough on this bill. It is a technical bill and not a lot of controversy really. So I commend this bill to the House. Thank you.
The Greens took too much time.
Itipika. Takutai Tashki.
Well, mōrena tātou, mōrena i te whare. I rise this morning to reaffirm our support, Te Pāti Māori support for the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill. While we support the passage of this bill, Te Pāti Māori remains steadfast in its long-term vision by Māori, for Māori solutions that empower whānau to determine their own pathways. Te Pāti Māori continues to challenge systems that seek to control rather than uplift, and we will push for a future where Māori-led social services are the norm, not the expectation. Don't get me wrong, social workers hold a vital role within our communities. Over the many years that I've worked in the community, I've worked alongside some many great social workers and some many not so great social workers. So this bill helps tighten the practice and supports the future pathway for those social workers in the field. I want to actually take this opportunity to acknowledge a social worker that I had the privilege of, actually she cared for me. In the last 7 weeks of last year, I spent in hospital, and I never thought I needed a social worker because I didn't know why I needed a social worker. But obviously at the end of those 7 weeks of in hospital, I truly did need a social worker who could manaaki, who had aroha, who had compassion, and at the end of the day was able to keep my confidentiality of what I was going through at that time. So I want to acknowledge the social worker Moana who supported me at Miramore Hospital at Te Kāhui Ora Services. It's not an easy job being a social worker, I've got to say. There's a huge negative light on social workers within vulnerable communities, and especially within Māori communities. When Māori families hear the word social worker, they've been referred to them for what? They're scared, they become isolated. It's like the police knocking on your door when you're told you're being referred to a social worker because you're unsure of why that is happening. So we want to be able to change that, and we hope that this bill is able to help those social workers in the field change that negativity and light for our whānau. We need social workers that are embedded and have the understanding of a tikanga-led, mokopuna-focused model of practice that will empower our mokopuna for future generations. Kia ora.
Speaker.
Lawrence Unan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise also on behalf of the Green Party to support this bill. And I think we have heard a lot from across the House, but I think it does deserve mentioning every single time, the important mahi that our social workers do for Aotearoa every single day. And it is important that we do have sufficient safety net, but also recognition of that work, but also acknowledgement of the safety net for people that they support when something doesn't go well. Madam Speaker, so in this case, when we're looking at this bill, there are a number of quality of life improvements that we're seeing when it comes to social workers and the right of social workers here, and particularly, I think, from us, the establishment of the tribunal and also the board when determining suspensions, when addressing the issue of suspensions is particularly important, and I think it's something that greater clarity is needed, and we're hoping that this bill address some of that, and we're really looking forward to how we are going to be able to provide that level of confidence and clarity and transparency through this. So from that perspective, we're interested to see the work of the tribunal as they are established. Madam Speaker, as we heard, there are also additional other quality of life changes in here that I think deserve mentioning, and this is particularly when we're looking at Schedule 2 and 3 of this bill. And I think this is something that my colleague Ricardo Menendez-March mentioned earlier in terms of the fact that by replacing terms such as different with various and not having that othering effect, particularly for Māori, for Pacifica, for migrant social workers and workers in general is incredibly important. Madam Speaker, we are seeing that with the latest census that the demographics of Aotearoa is changing. We are seeing record numbers of Māori, proportion of Māori, and also of Asians, of other migrants of color, and their visibility and their culture and their experience is an integral part to how our societies now operate. And I think in terms of this, it is really heartening to see bills like this that actually highlight some of these and the changing nature of some of that. The fact is that when we are introducing legislation, when we're looking at public services, we're still seeing the fact that migrant workers and also women and anyone with intersectionality component is often not only invisibilized or undermined, but also the fact that they simply are being paid a lot less in proportion. So with this particular bill and with the broader picture, and lots of people have been talking about the broader context of social work and our public services, we would like to see other forms of legislation or other measures and levers being addressed to address the fact that we do not have pay equity in certain areas from a gender perspective for Wahine Māori, for Pacifica women, for migrant women, who are some of the key workers when it comes to social work, because it is still predominantly a female-led workforce. And as we have seen with other female-led workforces, there is a general assumption that just because that you care, it means that you don't have to be paid as much. And we have actually heard high-ranking officials and public servants who are in a directorship role or deputy directorship role actually vocalizing the fact that, like, just because, just because you care, they will keep on taking on more burden. They will keep on burning out because they just care. We don't have to give them more pay. And I think this, both in the private and public sector, is something that we definitely need to address. Finally, Madam Speaker, I just want to say that it's incredibly heartening to see support from across the House for gender-neutral language under Schedule 3 of this bill. As we can have heard previously, we're seeing a greater representation of our rainbow whānau with the latest census, and we think that our trans and non-binary whānau is an integral part of our social workforce as well. With that, we support this bill.
Paulo Garcia.
The Social Worker Registration Amendment Bill enhances the social work profession in New Zealand. It also enhances the public safety aspect of the service that they provide. Registration elevates social workers to the level of other professions that require registration, like teachers, lawyers, and doctors. Madam Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that I believe that social work is a calling, and I thank everyone who has responded generously to this call and who work hard out there in often difficult circumstances. And I end with a shout out to the very many Filipinos who are social workers and who work all throughout New Zealand quite selflessly. Madam Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
I call Helen White.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I definitely want to join that acknowledgement of the work that social workers do, but what I want to do is talk a little bit about the wider concerns here. So this legislation is an attempt to make the registration network that belongs to the social work system stronger and actually a bit more autonomous, because the board will have 5 social workers on it, and it will become much more regulated by itself, as are other professions. But I want to really just focus for a minute on the incredibly critical role that social workers play, and actually just acknowledge that currently that system is falling down. The Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse and Care noted the following: social workers should have been a critical lifeline to the outside world for children and young people who were being abused in social welfare care. However, the inquiry heard from many survivors, as well as former caregivers and social workers, that social workers visited less frequently than department policy required them to, and sometimes did not visit at all. State documents reviewed by the inquiry show that social workers' caseloads were often too high to effectively manage, which meant that they visited children less regularly than required. Now that remains the case. We've heard from many colleagues across this House that we know we have a shortage of social workers. We know that they're overloaded. We know that they're underpaid. We know that group of social workers is 85% female, and that we have a problem in this country acknowledging that work that is caring work is valuable work and should be paid at a higher amount. So while this is a bill that really does improve the way that social workers are regulated, it's a small piece of the puzzle. And I heard the Minister say that this bill would ensure that the social workers would be able to effectively deliver services. Unfortunately, that's far from the truth. This bill will be a step in the right direction, but it will not ensure that they are able to deliver services. And so I would ask this House to consider what will make that difference, because this is a critical role, and currently it's falling short of the mark. We have, I think, 50% of the workforce who are over 50 in social work. We are underrepresented actually in male social workers as well as other groups, but mainly we have an issue with an overload of work, and the work burns people out. So we are going to have to build a different value into this work. We just cannot get away with what we have been doing. We need to make sure that our social workers are not leaving because of burnout, high workload and poor pay, and that we're adequately supporting them in our systems. That does not mean we should not hold people to account who do not do their job. Those things go side by side, and so it is good that we have put this bill in place which is more nuanced and is also, I think, really interestingly reviewed every 5 years. A very good way of handling a new situation is to review its effectiveness. All of that is good, and Labor stands with the government in support of the bill, but that doesn't mean that we don't see the big picture. We now have 7,520 people practicing social work under licence in this country. We need to make sure that that workforce is fit for a new generation, that it's able to sustain itself, and that means we need to put our money where our mouth is. Thank you. I commend the bill to the House.
Speaker.
Carl Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, social workers play a crucial role throughout New Zealand, and it's a real honour and privilege as the member for Wanganui to meet with social workers on a regular basis to talk to them about their mahi in our community. There are two things I wanted to note particularly about this bill and how it supports them and recognises their profession, Mr. Speaker. Currently, you cannot be suspended as a social worker where there are concerns about your work, and this bill enables that to happen. It also enables the combination of outcomes for decision-making about professional conduct, rather than being forced into choosing one of the outcomes to change or to ensure an effective resolution to a concern that's raised about a social worker, Mr. Speaker. And for these two reasons, I commend this bill to the House.
Te mangai o te whare.
Shannon Helbert.
Tēnā koe, te mangai o te whare. Nā u te raurau, nāku te raurau, ka ora ai te iwi. With your food basket, with my food basket, things will be well for all of our whānau, even up in Ngāpuhi. Can I take this moment, Mr. Speaker, to acknowledge all of our social workers across Aotearoa, New Zealand. e mihi ana ki a koutou mō te manaakitanga o tātou tamariki, tātou whānau, I roto I tātou hāpori, tēnei te mihi, tēnā rau atu ki a koutou katoa, ngā kaimahi tauwhiro o te ao nei. Mr. Speaker, that was just an acknowledgement to all of our social workers, champions of our children, of our whānau, our families and our communities, who really step up in a space where others can't, others are unable to ensure that the advocacy of our most vulnerable in this country is heard and that their rights are before them. Mr. Speaker, the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill is important and Labor supports it today because it will strengthen the regulatory framework for monitoring and governing social workers in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Mr. Speaker, this isn't a controversial bill before us today. Every 5 years or so, the Social Workers Registration Board works together with the Ministry of Social Development, MSD, to review, to update and to improve this particular piece of legislation. The last review, in fact, was conducted in 2020 under a Labor government, and it is great to see that the changes proposed in this bill actually reflects the findings of that particular review. We also support the proposed amendments because they align with our values of fairness, of social justice, Mr. Speaker, workforce sustainability, which I'll come to in a bit, and of course public safety. Mr. Speaker, there's three particular points or issues that I'd like to discuss in the House today. And the first one, I have been working very closely with the North Shore Women's Centre, who has suffered quite significant cuts from the Minister for Oranga Tamariki and has reduced counselling and social work services to our North Shore community from Glenfield right up to Rodney, restricting them back to only 2 days. The services available at this particular centre service almost 500 women across Auckland's North Shore and of course the children and families alongside of them. And as this government cuts back there, of course so do those services. And the question becomes, what is that risk? What is the outcome that we will see as a result of those services not being offered, the government burying their head in the sand and not wanting to engage with these particular services or assist them with finding any alternative support mechanisms for that provision to continue. So can I just acknowledge the team at North Shore Women's Centre that we will continue to stand with you while others can't and won't. And we will work together to ensure that those services continue to be made available on Auckland's North Shore. Mr. Speaker, the second point here is of course about the workforce shortages that we experience of social workers. It's a tough job. It's not incredibly well paid, but any government has to do more to ensure that we just keep up with the numbers required. There's an additional 142 full-time equivalent social workers each year that are required just to meet the population growth that we experience around the country. And of course I look to the the Minister for Vocational Training and ask the question, what is it we are doing? With cuts to Te Pukenga, to Tertiary Education Commission, to universities that are forecasted, how can we ensure that we are growing a workforce to meet the demand that is in front of us, to ensure that we have practitioners available that are well trained, that know what they're doing, in order to support women, children and families moving forward? I'm not seeing that. I'm concerned about that. And while this is a small bill with technical changes, it's significant in the greater context of everything. Mr. Speaker, lastly, can I acknowledge the government for making some step to the recognition of non-binary and trans our whānau using gender-neutral language. I know many of them are scared of this approach. It's about inclusion of everyone in this country. And Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
Dan Bidwar.
Mr. Speaker, this is a bill, and I wish to acknowledge all those social workers across the country for the contribution they make to our community, including my sister, Mr. Speaker, who is a registered social worker. I acknowledge Chantel and all the work that they've done. This is a great bill. I commend this bill to the House.
The Honourable Willow Jean Prime.
Ai, tēnā koe te manga e te whare tautoko ana hau I tērā kōrero. Mai wā tērā kōrero I tērā taha. Hea te kōrero o tō tuahine kia koe e pānaki ngā mahi o ngā kaimahi toko I te ora. Mr. Speaker, I stand in support of the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill. I was a member of the Social Services Select Committee and sat through the submission process on this, so I want to acknowledge all of my colleagues that were on that committee for this piece of work that we have done. As others have mentioned, Mr. Speaker, this isn't a controversial bill. It does enjoy support across the House, and the bill is straightforward in terms of recommending minor and technical amendments. These amendments, as has been said, has come out of a review that has been done of the legislation, and I believe, along with others, that these minor technical amendments will improve the legislation, this important piece of legislation for a very important sector and workforce. And I want to join with others and acknowledge the social workers, the work that they do with our most vulnerable people, such as children in care and the youth justice system, in our health system and in our aged care system. And Mr. Speaker, I think that it has been important to draw the House's attention to the wider context in which this bill sits in terms of our social workers, in terms of the workforce and that particular sector. In my contribution to the second reading last night, I pointed out my concerns that we do not have a workforce strategy for social work. But I am pleased to hear that the Minister who was in the chair last night, on behalf of the Minister who is sponsoring this bill, say that the government is going to work on a workforce strategy and an action plan. And I can't stress enough how urgent that is from meetings that I had this week that says 13% are looking to leave the profession in the very short term, that we are unable to recruit the amount of social workers that we need into the profession. In fact, there's a downward trend of numbers enrolled, and over 45% of social work students leave the course before completion. We heard that the number of social workers that we need is not keeping up with our population growth. And we also know and have heard loud and clear from the sector that the impacts of this government's cuts to the back office of Oranga Tamariki has put more pressure, more work on the front line social workers. Quite simple, is it? To cut, quite simple, is it? To cut back office jobs and load that on to frontline social workers? Quite simple, according to that member across the other side of the House. Says a lot about their priorities, doesn't it, Mr. Speaker? Because they could have cut funding from other areas like landlords, like tobacco companies. Could have taken the money from there, but instead you will take the money, Mr. Speaker, instead they will take the money from Oranga Tamariki, who service our most vulnerable children and families. We will take $30 million from early intervention and prevention services from the North Shore Women's Centre, as was mentioned previously. Oh, Mr. Speaker, I was only going to make a short contribution to this bill, but However, when you have comments like that from the other side of the House, and disgraceful comments like that from the other side of the House, when they would prefer us,
Mr Bates, I note that you had a speech, a very short one, which perhaps gave you the opportunity. Just short and sharp and not ongoing commentary, please.
Wasteful spending, that member says, Mr Speaker. Wasting it on servicing our most vulnerable children and families. In early intervention and prevention services, cutting $30 million a year, over $120 million, wasteful spending. I could tell that member, where that government is wasting money, bad choices, wrong decisions, wrong priorities. And this is supposed to be a non-controversial bill. The bill isn't, but the wider context is. Oh my gosh, Mr. Speaker, now the minister on the other side of the House is taking issue with what I am saying in terms of this sector. Tone deaf. Tone deaf. Let me read you the headline, Mr. Speaker, of an article. Fears children will be harmed as Oranga Tamariki staff grapple with overwhelming workloads. Oranga Tamariki social workers say they are living with the constant fear that a child could be harmed on their watch due to their overwhelming workloads as they begin industrial action, because apparently wasteful spending to give them a pay rise. They're not happy with the 0% offer from the Child Protection Agency. They said it was insulting and would fix nothing about unsafe workloads. Tone deaf, I think, the comments from the other side of the House today. Mr. Speaker, I will conclude my speech here, much to the delight of the other side, I am sure. We, Labour, was proud to have been part of this review, part of this legislation, the drafting of this legislation, the technical and minor amendments that are being proposed here. We are proud to support this. We want to thank our social workers for the important work that they do in our communities every day. I commend this bill to the House.
Rima Nakle.
Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to commend our social workers for picking up the pieces when they come across families that are devastated by the effects of drugs, of methamphetamine. And I do want to recall that the previous government gave $2.75 million to the mongrel mob, but our social workers that we're commending around the House today have to deal with the mess that the wasteful $2.75 million to mongrel mob has created. But Mr. Speaker, what I'd like to do is I'd like to commend the Social Services and Community Committee for the work that they did.
Having been on the receiving end of an equal barrage, I thought you might like to actually take cognizance of the advice I gave to Mr. Bates.
And Mr. Speaker, this bill is a logical, a practical, a sensible and a positively impactful bill, and is part of a suite of part of changes that we're making to demonstrate our government's commitment to supporting our social workers, and I commend this bill to the House.
Great speech.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill, third reading.
Call on Government Order of the Day number 11.
Interrupted debate on the second reading of the Fisheries, International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill.
The Fisheries, International and Other Matters Amendment Bill, call number 4. That would be Todd Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me pleasure to rise on behalf of ACT to talk on the Fisheries, International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill. I want to first start by thanking the Primary Production Select Committee, ably chaired by my colleague Mark Cameron, and his colleagues on that committee have done some excellent work looking at this bill. I also want to note that the bill has been unanimously recommended that it passes, and all the amendments that were made through the diligent work of that select committee have also been unanimously recommended. Best select committee in the House, Mr. Abel tells me, and again want to acknowledge his contribution to that select committee. Look, this bill, just to recap, is important in ensuring that New Zealand meets its international obligations, particularly around preventing illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, better known as IUU, which is a fun little acronym for this time of the morning. And it does ensure that New Zealand's regulations around both flagged, New Zealand flagged operating vessels operating in our waters, also ensuring our ability to combat this illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing we're able to do that, and also making sure that we do, as I said, fulfil all of our responsibilities as a responsible citizen operating in international fishing regimes. And so this bill has been, as I said, extensively examined by the Select Committee. They did receive some submissions, 6 submissions, and they actually heard from 2 submitters. And as I said, they've done some really great collaborative work on this bill. And so it is my pleasure on behalf of ACT to recommend it to the House.
Suze Redmayne.
Look, I'm very proud to support this bill. It's about protecting our deep water fishing industry, and it's an industry that contributes $2.7 billion to the New Zealand economy, $1.6 billion to GDP, employs 8,500 people. This bill's about sustainable economic growth, and it's about being, as my colleague alluded to, a good neighbour and trusted and responsible global trading partner. I commend this bill to the House.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Which call am I taking? We seem to have missed a whole number of calls from the government benches, maybe. But regardless, I'm being. I'm.
Carry on. Point of. Sorry, did you speak? Did you stand to take that call?
Yeah. I'm happy to.
My apologies, I did miss that. So the call we'll put things right back.
Excuse me, sorry.
Consequence.
Morena, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Tēnā tātou katoa e te whare. So we support this, obviously, and all the work that's gone ahead, Mr. Speaker, but I just want to, so this is coming from my own precious home back in Te Kao. We are known, Ikanui is a very important special name, as the Minister will know, and we come for those things. Even my tupuna Ikanui, they call him that, and even look like a fish, and we are known to even sound like fish when we're speaking Māori. So in all of that, and to all of the work that has gone on in the Select Committee, of course we support this. We are about fish and everything that comes out of our wonderful fine oceans in Te Aupōuri land, Mr. Speaker, but just making sure to take to our feet to support the work that this House does for all of our whānau and all of our hapu and aui, particularly Te Aupōuri, particularly Te Taitokerau, tēnā tātou.
Lan Farm.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Very pleased to be standing today in support of this bill, particularly when we're at a time when we really need cross-party collaboration and the attention and the energy of us collectively in this chamber to actually make good decisions in the environmental space. This is a really great example of some much needed legislation, Mr. Speaker. I really want to thank the work that's gone on in the evolution of this bill, particularly to the Select Committee who has considered it. And I want to reflect on, Mr. Speaker, that I had a very privileged experience of just a snapshot of experiencing and visualising the enormity and the vast expanse of our oceans. And that was when I took up a role for the Department of Conservation to run the science and biodiversity contracts on Rangitahua Rao Island in the Kermadec. And that involved it's roughly 1,000 kilometres from Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland. And that involved a 5-day sailing trip on this beautiful yacht, the Tiama. But throughout those 5 days, you can't help but be distinctly aware of how vulnerable our oceans are in terms of there not being eyes out there. There are simply not eyes out there. And after those 5 days, by the time we arrived on Rangitahua Rao Island, again, it was absolutely striking, the views of the ocean and the immense challenge of actually having eyes and patrolling and monitoring challenges that our whole entire agencies actually have in front of them. So we do have these major challenges, particularly with these vessels that may be operating outside of our exclusive economic zone in international waters. And there's a number of issues which this bill luckily, and I'm pleased to see, addresses. The one that is very unfortunate that it didn't extend to is, of course, the workers' rights when they are in these operations on these vessels, extremely poor and challenging working conditions are experienced by these workers. And we know that a lot of the issue with illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing is that it's often, not these, the bad guys who are coming from overseas. Unfortunately, often it is legal, regulated vessels who do their reporting, who step outside the bounds of what is legal and undertake illegal activities. So really support the work that's come with this. We would love to see, as Te Pāti Kakariki, more cross-party collaboration, particularly in the oceans and fisheries space. But I need to bring up the example of Tikapa Moana, where the government are starting to make moves towards protecting just a tiny slice of that. It would only take things to 6% protection. And yet, the government is still considering opening up these high protection areas within that proposed marine protected areas to commercial fishing. We cannot keep behaving like this, and we cannot keep not recognising the importance and the significance of our oceans, not only to functional ecosystems and a functional planet, but to the well-being of us. And there's no place where that is more obvious than oceans. So I really, again, support the work that's been done and want to thank those that have been involved. And Te Pāti Kakariki will absolutely support the passing of this bill and look forward to similar collaborative work. Thank you.
Mike Butterick.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a pretty straightforward bill, this really. It amends the Fisheries Act 96, so as our colleague said over there, so we can better meet our international obligations regarding the IUU, and it also improves clarity, efficiency of statutory provisions and associated decision-making process. And so this update is just that. It's clearer, more efficient and more reasonable. I commend it to the House.
The Honourable Rachel Brooking.
This time, Mr Speaker, and apologies for my assumption that the government members weren't taking their calls. That's my bad. Perhaps they will forgive me, given that, of course, we were in this chamber at midnight last night because for some reason we are in urgency talking about the Fisheries, International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill that has been around for a bit of time. Of course, we see in the chamber that the date is still on the 25th of March, when in fact we are now on the 27th of March in normal people's time. Regardless, I want to note that this bill used to be in my name, and so of course we are supporting this bill, and I'm pleased that it has progressed. Also pleased that the Select Committee has made a very considered report back to the bill and recommended a number of changes that on the face of it look very sensible, and I'm sure we'll be able to ask the Minister some questions about those in the committee stage. So they all appear to be clarification changes to make sure, for instance, that the Chief Executive can take into account any previous non-compliance in any jurisdiction. That's one of the changes that has been made. And as we've heard from Todd Stevenson before, a large part of this bill is about illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, the IUU. We know that there were 6 submissions and 2 oral submissions made, so thank all those people who've been involved in that process. I just want to finish, what is a short contribution in this second reading of the bill, to call again, just like my colleague Lan Farm has, with her bipartisan plea on these fisheries matters. We can work constructively. We were working constructively on the Hauraki Gulf. That bill was reported back unanimously, just as this one has been, yet we hear that there are going to be some changes that were not part of the Select Committee process, and that is very poor form. What is good form is when a sensible piece of legislation that has had a lot of input from officials who deal with international fishing, which is, an interesting thing. It's obviously outside of New Zealand waters. So these people, they go to the international conferences. Some of the only international agreements in the world have been on fishing, and they do a very good job. And this has been taken to the Select Committee. The Select Committee has made a considered, as I said before, commentary, and now it's coming back to the House, and I'm sure the Minister will be wanting to answer any questions in Committee of the Whole on the bill as it was looked at by the Select Committee and as the submissions were made on it at that Select Committee. So it's going through that process where the Select Committee had it for a good amount of time as well. This is how lawmaking should be done in this country, and I would implore the government to take this approach in many other bills. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Carl Bates.
Mr Speaker, I've been subject to your effective action with violations in the House today, and interestingly enough, this bill ensures effective action can be taken in the event of fisheries violations on our seas. Mr Speaker, I commend it to the House.
Mr Speaker,
The Honourable Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just to continue the theme from the Honourable Rachel Brooking, who was the Minister in the previous government responsible for this. This has been very much a work based on collaboration, successive ministers and the Select Committee coming up with something that is unanimously, I think, supported across the House. Illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing is one of those global commons issues that we have to work with international partners, come up with a regulatory regime that works, but importantly also the compliance machinery to make sure that we can actually make a difference. Interesting to read, sir, that we pride ourselves in New Zealand on our vessels and our fleet following the rules, but reported instances of New Zealand vessels on the high seas actually operating outside the law, so to speak. So very important that we get this fixed up.
And just the only other thing I would note is that the Honourable David Parker gave a foreign policy speech in the Parliament this morning, and one of the things that he raised was in the Pacific, very important that New Zealand really steps up and works with Pacific nations on a number of fronts, particularly economic development, but the sustainable and effective management of the fisheries resource to promote both the economic development of Pacific Island economies, but also the proper stewardship of that resource is something that we need to really turn our minds to. And I know that the current Minister has worked in that space and I'm sure has a lot of views about it. Labor is happy to support this bill through its passage, in its passage through the House.
Catherine Webb.
Look, I rise to support the International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill, and I'd like to acknowledge the Primary Production Select Committee. I was privileged to be part of that committee as we navigated this very important bill through, and it was great to be able to talk about the value of our fishing industry to New Zealand, the $2.7 billion industry, and of course the purpose to uphold the integrity of this very important industry that we wish to grow as well. So this bill is a very important part of that. We want to put New Zealand up on the global stage and meet our international obligations. So with that, I commend it to the House.
Tangi Utakiri.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. I'll join the chorus of support, the sort of reunity at times around the House in supporting this bill. I do want to acknowledge, sir, the Minister for Fisheries is progressing this, including my colleague, the Honourable Rachel Brooking, when Labor introduced this back in August of 2023. I had the privilege of sitting in on the Primary Production Committee. I'm not a member of that committee, but I did for the purposes of hearing submissions on this bill. When we have a look at the Select Committee report, Mr Speaker, which is usually what we do at this particular part of the process for second reading, it identifies that there were 6 submissions. So that's not a huge number of submissions, but when we look at the nature of those submissions, they were well thought through, they were very representative, and actually it really demonstrates the power of the submission process. I know the Select Committee report identified one particular submitter that focused on one issue, which comes to working day times in terms of appeals in the legal process, that has initiated a change as a result of that. And I'll tease that out a little bit when we get to the next stage with the committee with the Minister. I'm sure we'll be looking forward to that. But this is a bill that is important to protect the high value access that we have in markets when it comes to seafood. It is one that looks to provide a little bit more scoping around those 3 specific issues of illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, and in that context I certainly support this bill.
Dana Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to take the last call in this reading of the illegal, unregulated and unreporting fishing bill. Look, I think it makes perfect sense. I can sense bipartisan support across the House for this bill, which is good. The bill essentially requiring permits for all fishing by New Zealand vessels outside New Zealand waters, which closes the gap that was there previously. We have to do our bit, Mr Speaker, for sustainability and to look after our fisheries and those of our neighbouring nations. So with that, I commend the bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Fisheries, International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill, second reading.
This bill is set down for committee stage immediately. I declare the House in committee for consideration of the Fisheries, International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill.
Members, the House is in committee on the Fisheries, International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill. We come first to the debate on Part 1. Part 1 is the debate on clauses 3 to 61, amendments to Fisheries Act 1996 and the schedule. The question is that Part 1 stand part. Honourable Shane Jones.
I should take a short call for what should be a relatively uneventful set of exchanges in the House. This builds on an area that I've sought to distinguish myself in, that is consensus and shared interests and finding common ground in the area of natural resources and fisheries. It's important that we acknowledge this is part of an international effort. Indeed, recently I was in Aotearoa on behalf of our government, and a great deal of interest was directed towards New Zealand as to when we would actually pass this legislation to enable us to stand with a bunch of other nations. We need to be mindful, as the legislation is implemented, that future leaders in the bureaucracy maintain a sense of balance, because the fishing industry, as you well know, Mr. Chair, is a wildlife industry, and from time to time certain lapses do take place. But by and large, I think all members of the House realise that our reputation as a fishing nation, our reputation internationally, is second to none. And I see very little reason as to why our committee stage should be protracted. Thank you very much.
Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for those introductory remarks about working towards consensus. Very pleased to hear that, Minister. My first question is relating to the changes from the Select Committee, and I note that there are no order papers, amendment papers on this bill, so we can look at the track changed version of the bill in front of us. And the first change is at clause 29, and this is regarding 113HA, criteria that must be met before international fishing permit is issued. And the vessel must be registered. And then there's a change from the Select Committee that the applicant vessel must be authorised by relevant foreign country. So it says, for an international fishing permit, the applicant vessel must be authorised by the relevant foreign country to fish within that country's national fisheries jurisdiction. So I take that to mean if New Zealand was looking at issuing a permit, say, just for example, a Norwegian boat, then that vessel, that Norwegian vessel has to be authorised to fish in Norway. And I'd just like confirmation that that is the Minister's expectation as well, and if he would like to comment at all on the discussion that the Select Committee had on that issue.
Mr. Chair.
Tangi Utakiri.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a number of questions for the Minister. I'm going to start with clause 5. This is seeking to amend amendments to Part 4, specifically Section 32. Now this relates to criteria of eligibility to receive provisional catch history for quota management stock. One of the interesting things that seems to flow through the bill is a change in the descriptor when it comes to largely the Chief Executive being authorised to make certain decisions. So I'd like to point the Minister to what is a proposed new clause 2A and specifically subclause B, italics 2. This is talking about the ability for the Chief Executive to basically take an action or make a decision, and it refers to what in the, quote, judgment, end quote, of the Chief Executive was a valid authority to take the stock. Sure, using New Zealand ship and flows on from there. My question to the Minister is the use of the word judgment appropriate? Because throughout this bill there are actually different descriptors that are used. If we look at clause 7, it's talking about in the Chief Executive's opinion. I think elsewhere it's talking about in the consideration of the Chief Executive. So this is about consistency of language and whether or not there is a a specific reason as to why there is a difference in utilising the word judgment when it comes to Clause 5, consideration elsewhere in the legislation or in the bill, Chief Executive's opinion in Clause 7. So wanting to know the consistent approach there and the rationale behind that. The other part of that is in some parts of the bill, but not in Clause 5, there are effectively, if not a list, a sense of a direction provided as to how the Chief Executive would go about, or things that they would need to consider in exercising consideration, opinion or judgment. And so my follow-on question to the Minister is what's provided in the bill to drive the decision-making process that the Chief Executive will undertake when engaging things, particularly when it comes to judgment. It might be that, I don't know, the use of the word judgment is consistent elsewhere in the bill or in other legislation, but I'd be interested in the Minister's thoughts on that.
Mr. Chair.
Honourable Minister.
If I can refer first to the question from the former Minister. I am assured by the officials that before any vessel wandering off fishing in international waters or indeed other nations' waters, that our officials will need to establish that they have a legal entitlement to actually fish. Perish the thought it should be in Norway, but in more proximate nations. On the question of Mr. Utikere's question, which really poses a question possibly of trust or confidence about the judgment that will be exercised by the bureaucracy in the future. I think that the bill clearly states that it's within the ambit of his or her decision-making power that they take account of actual fishing history. As I said, from time to time, fishing boats do find themselves in a situation where enforcement action might be taken against them. But by and large, these are relatively insignificant matters. And the Director General needs to balance such blemishes against the ongoing need for New Zealand to have a flourishing and robust industry. And I have every confidence that our bureaucracy will not be swayed by faddish ideology.
Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greetings to the Minister and the Chair, who, amongst other things, used to be the Chief Executive of TOCM, and also an ambassador for New Zealand in respect of the Pacific territories under the Macaulay, when Murray Macaulay was the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So my question arises from sections 42 and thereabouts of the bill. Mr. Chairman, the underlying ill that is attempted to be remedied by this bill is illegal unreported fishing in the Pacific area in particular. We don't have much of a problem with this in New Zealand because we're well able to police our EEZ in a way that Pacific Islands find difficult. But illegal activity both within other country EEZs and on the high seas is something that worries New Zealand. I am sure that the Minister and the Chair has seen the control room, I forget which Pacific nation houses it, but it takes data from American sources and other sources, including New Zealand, and monitors the place of fishing fleets in the Pacific, and it relies in part upon transponders that are on each of those fishing vessels throughout the region. That information is beamed up to satellites, comes into the control centre, and then there is an ability for those monitoring fishing in the region to see where vessels are. But occasionally the vessels go dark. They turn off their transponders and they stop transmitting data, and so that is an indicator sometimes of illegal activity where the fishing boats are turning off their transponders so as not to be visible to the countries in whose EEZs they might be about to move into, and as a consequence, this facilitates or is part of the illegal and unreported fishing that we have in the region. I had hoped the Minister might pay attention to the question.
I was just going to say, you can hold up, I'll stop the clock and we'll just wait. Well, the Minister's obviously taking advice.
I am following up Mr. Parker.
Yeah, thank you, and I'm sure the Minister is. In fact, I'm sure the Minister knows more about these issues than I do. So we have this problem in the Pacific where the most important financial resource, not just a food source, but a financial resource in the Pacific Islands is often their fishing resource. The revenue they make from fishing is sometimes their highest source of revenue to government and one of the highest sources of income to the countries. So the protection of that resource, both in a sustainability sense, but also in terms of maximising the economic reward that can be returned to the Pacific countries, is absolutely one of the most important things that happens in the Pacific. So I'm supportive of this legislation, but my questions for the Minister are, firstly, is he concerned about vessels going dark and illegal activity in the Pacific? I can recount a discussion that I had when I was Minister of Fisheries with Tallies. I asked them why Tallies had stopped participating in fishing day schemes in the Pacific. That's a scheme under which a company bids for a number of rights to fish on a certain number of days, which is a proxy for a control on volume. And I was told by the senior people within that organisation that they can only fish for 24 hours in a day, which was effectively them saying that there is fraud in the Pacific Island fishing schemes, with some people pushing the boundaries of the rules and fishing when they're not. So we've got dark vessels, we've got other vessels that are fishing with fishing day permits in different countries, but they're not abiding by the terms of those. So those are my first two questions about the Minister's concerns about that. But if I could have an answer to that, and then I have a follow-up question.
The Honourable Minister.
I'd like a few minutes to explain this. The Goldilocks zone in Pacific fisheries is 10 degrees above and 10 degrees below the equator. Coming south from 10 degrees is a large fishery. It's often the albacore fishery, and the small mosquito boats are continually working in international waters. A response from New Zealand and the Pacific nations was to require such vessels to unload their catch in ports, thus enabling investigators or officers to board and check. This is an ongoing challenge to our neck of the woods because not all nations abide by that. The conditions upon the mosquito fleet, if I can speak figuratively, are such that very few New Zealanders would survive on those vessels. Now, coming back to the largest pelagic fishery in the entire world, which is managed in the following way. The nations belonging to the Nauru Agreement have bound together, including Tokelau, and as an associate, the Cook Islands. They run a scheme that you purchase days, and you can catch as much fish as you like within that day. If, however, you catch nothing, then you've paid for an infertile day. They have also now, and Micronesia is leading the pack, created a situation that they will not sell entitlements to any fishing nation who does not bring the vessel back to a port and disgorge from the actual vessel that's caught the fish onto a larger mothership, for want of a better expression. They are also moving towards a situation that they will not sell days to nations that focus exclusively on taking fish from the high seas. This piece of legislation is enabling us to join with other nations to board and inspect those nations that are taking fish from the high seas, which is administered under the United Nations. The Select Committee, of its own volition, created this body of work. And one of the outcomes that we are addressing and passing today does enable New Zealand to achieve some of the outcomes contemplated by the various working parties of the United Nations. We do have a problem with various nations turning off their transponders and trying to avoid detection. And the money that's recently been spent through our Air Force does enable New Zealand to participate in initiatives called kurukuru and other such things where the French, the Aussies, the Americans and the Kiwis from time to time work together. We do spend over $8 to $9 million in Honiara at the FFA, the Fishing Forum Agency, as an adjunct organisation of the broader Pacific Islands Forum. We have been the leading nation in that regard, and each year we are endeavouring to boost our institutional investment in the island nation states. I don't want in this Parliament to cast aspersion upon any particular island nation state, but I'd encourage those of us who are interested in geopolitics in the Pacific to follow it assiduously. On the question of what practically is likely to happen now, we have these powers, we're giving essentially to our MPI these powers. We will now increase our ability to surveil our own fleet, which I must say is modest in size, although Sea Lords for a long period of time has had the Will Watch, catching Alfonsino, catching orange ruffy out of Mauritius and out of Cape Town in that part of the Indian Ocean. But that vessel is not registered in New Zealand, it's registered in the Cook Islands. So although we have a modest fleet, there's a huge expectation that Kiwis, a fishing nation, clean pair of hands, that we will continually lift the bar. And flourishes aside, I genuinely believe, Mr Parker, that the efforts of the Select Committee do help us achieve a higher level of compliance and a higher level of acceptability and legitimisation when dealing with the vessels on the high seas.
The Honourable David Parker.
Can I thank the Minister for that explanation and for reminding me that it's Honiara where this monitoring activity takes place. When I was in Honiara with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Right Honourable Winston Peters last year, and we inspected that facility and in another Pacific country, on more than one occasion the local politicians, you could see, would like more of the fishing effort to have been carried out by their own people so that they could earn a wage from the fishing rather than just take a royalty on the fishing day. There was recently an article that I read in a newspaper from an Australian, long experienced Australian regulator of fisheries who's long lived in the Pacific. I forget her name. It was a very good article which contrasted the position in respect of small island states compared with those that have the advantage of association with France. Because France, and I wasn't aware of this until recently, France, through their areas, have been more assiduous at ensuring the economic development benefits that can flow from fishing their own fish, if you like, there being the Pacific Island territory, through a fishing fleet that is French. And I wondered whether the Minister had a view as to whether comparing the effectiveness of changes in this legislation, such as those which are found around Section 42 in respect of this monitoring of the international fleet, might actually be better achieved if New Zealand and Australia assisted the Pacific Islands through support to perhaps buy a fleet leased to the Pacific Islands that could be used by those Pacific Islands to maximise the value they get from their own fishery. And so my question to the Minister is, first, that general one, and secondly, because he probably is aware of more of this than I am, how the French do it.
The Honourable Minister.
It's absolutely true. We have a working relationship, obviously, with New Caledonia, and a number of us from our Māori side would know there's an incredibly close connection between the origins of the iwis and Tapu Tapu Aotea, located in French Polynesia. The French Polynesians and the French nation state have zero tolerance for the international exploitation of the pelagic fisheries resource in their sovereign waters. Zero tolerance. And a similar situation subsists in New Caledonia, but there are ongoing debates as to where the maritime boundary is between Vanuatu. The other thing I'd say, Mr. Speaker, is in some of our Pacific Island nation neighbours, such as the Solomons, Honiara, they have a thing called the archipelago fishery. And within that fishery, it is part of the sovereign waters, but at all times the nation states are seeking ways to boost the returns, because fisheries is now a currency of influence, which is why the Select Committee actually came up with some very useful outcomes, which we're about to pass today, and it puts more acid on New Zealand to ensure that our own pair of hands are clean. In relation to upgrading fleets and such matters, then obviously we have a substantial budget through Foreign Affairs, and a fair degree of that goes to fisheries. But I'm going to send a warning of caution. Unless we are continually investing and doing things that are practical economic assistance to our Pacific neighbours, do not be surprised if they walk on by the traditional donors and go to the new donor partners. Recently we had Transform Aquino, a brilliant academic from the Solomon Islands, spoke just up the road, and he warned New Zealand, less of the Oxfam approach and more of the practical infrastructure approach.
Honourable David Parker.
My final contribution in response to that is I suggest he reads my speech this morning.
Dr. Lawrence Zunan.
The Chair. Thank you, Minister. I actually really enjoyed the Minister's explanation for some of the contributions made by the Honourable Dr. David Parker. My question is sort of along the similar vein, having not been set through the Select Committee stage and not part of the Primary Productions Committee, but knowing that this bill originated a little while ago, I wanted to check with the Minister, does the Minister see this bill being consistent with agreement which is signed, which is agreement under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, or BBNJ? Because I'm assuming when we're looking at the broader, so we're looking at sort of, I guess in some ways, Section 4 of Part 1, which is around the interpretation, because predominantly this bill is around IUU. I wondered if the Minister has gotten any advice on checking in terms of that's consistent with what our general trajectory is under that particular agreement, and particularly I'm looking at Part 3 and 4 of that agreement, the BBNJ agreement. So yeah, so just checking with the Minister on whether this legislation largely is in line with that, and noting that the bill was introduced before the agreement was signed, but now the agreement has been signed and has gone through some of the review process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, like the previous speaker, I did find that interplay or the exchange between Honourable David Parker and the Minister very interesting. So I have one question about that exchange, and then two more sort of boring questions, really. That was an interesting exchange, and there was quite a lot of Gothic terms involved, and the Minister was talking about fisheries as a currency of influence, but that the Select Committee has made some helpful changes in that regard. And I was wondering if he could point us to the changes that the Select Committee has made that he was referring to in that exchange over a series of questions. That would be helpful. Then my two more precise questions, still on clause 29, and there's a change that the Select Committee has made to 113 HB, and at the start it's just that Chief Executive may but is not required to issue an international fisheries permit taking into account, and then there's some things listed, and then there's some what looks like rewording in the rest of that clause, and I was just wondering if the Minister can confirm that that's his interpretation as well of those changes to 113 HB, that it's just this supposed to be a clarification that Chief Executive may but is not required to take take into account the non-compliance, and then that the rest of the wording is just a rewording. So that's at so page 19 of the bill, 113 HB.
113 HB, yes.
Yes. So that's one more precise question, and then another more precise question is going to page 24 of the bill. So clause 42 inserts some new sections, and this is one that the Select Committee has made a change to again. This is what I'm focusing on, and it is changes 113 UA, investigation of serious violations, power to detain vessel at port. We were discussing it earlier. And at 5, the Chief Executive may direct the release of the vessel. Now, this is where my question comes in at A, because it says, so they may detain if they believe on reasonable grounds that the serious violation took place on the high seas, comma, on the request of the vessel's flag state. Now, this is a picky question, but is it that the vessel's state has requested the vessel to do the serious violation, or is it that the vessel's flag state has requested that the vessel doing the serious violation be taken into the port? So it's really a question of grammar, and I think it would be useful to have on the Hansard the answer to that. And it may be that a slight amendment is needed. And on that point, I'm always disturbed that we're in urgency at the moment in committee stage, running right on to a third reading. And can I recommend against doing that, because sometimes there are little changes that may need to be made. I'm not saying that this is the one that needs a change, but it is good practice to have a couple of days whereby any small amendments can be made if they need to be made.
Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Chair, I just have two other questions. I would be grateful if the Minister was able to respond to the earlier issue that I'd asked around the use of judgment, consideration and opinion of the Chief Executive, and the need or otherwise for perhaps consistency, and if not, then the rationale behind that. The first of my other questions actually follows on from what the Honourable Rachel Brooking has just alluded to. It's just the next section down, 113 UB. I think what's really important is that the powers that are given for the purposes of search on a vessel whilst at port are alongside the Search and Surveillance Act, but they also are as permissive as they could be in the context of making sure that liberty and the like is protected. So I'd like to take the Minister to subclause 3B. So this is where a high seas fishery inspector may do one
Can you
or
just
more.
give us the page number?
So, this is on page
19?
24 of the commentary from the Select Committee.
Yeah.
So it's subclause 3B, and it's about taking any sample of a thing that may be inspected for forensic or other scientific testing. My question to the Minister is, does this provision provide for an item in its entirety to actually be taken? Because it might be that, you know, for the purpose of exercising the search powers, an item may, for example, need to be seized for the purpose of this particular clause, but there's nothing contained in this clause that would allow, as I could see it, for the taking of an item in its entirety. It only talks about a sample of an item which may be inspected, which does not lead to an item in its entirety to be taken. The other stuff around remote access, that's not relevant in this particular context, but it's, in terms of taking something in its entirety, is really only subclause 3D that relates to a copy of a record or a document that may be inspected. So my point is not trying to be limiting, but rather being empowering, and whether there is provision contained that allows for a specific item in its entirety, which may be a small item, but to be taken for the purposes of that particular section. The other question that I have is just in relation to on page 28 of the Select Committee report and commentary. This is clause 49. This talks about the publication of decisions on administrative penalties. So I like the sense that there is going to be some accountability and transparency around this. There are particular aspects or criteria that the Chief Executive must do for each provision or each time a penalty is imposed. The location, the amount of the penalty, etc. No issue with that. But there's nothing there that guides a particular time frame within which these decisions must actually be effectively uploaded to an internet site. So it could be that is the intention in drafting this that actually there is not any time frame, that it could be on an annual basis, that it could be, I don't know, it just seems to be very silent as to a time frame within which these actions must be taken. I mean, they'll be taken by the Chief Executive, but it seems to me the purpose around transparency and accountability is putting them up on the website, but there's no guidance as to when that would happen.
Honourable Shane Jones.
Despite my best efforts of avoiding protraction, I shall stand again. In relation to the former Minister's question, I'm advised, yes, the change clarifies that the Chief Executive Officer may take those matters into account. But look, I think it's really important. We're going to have from time to time, before I talk about the Southern Oceans, we're going to have time to time where people associated with our nation state may play a role and find wrongdoing upon foreign flag vessels. A foreign flag vessel, the ultimate authority lies with the state that owns the flag. The nation state of New Zealand has no authority to endlessly take possession, control or hold a foreign flagged vessel. We do have, through this legislation, authority to go and inspect, request further information, help the host nation do the check, undertake the analysis when in port. But it's important that this rather obscure but very important principle be borne in mind. The two cornerstone pillars pertaining to this type of fishing is the United Nations Fishing Agreement, but also the law of the sea. And Kiwis were involved in constructing the legislation or the principles that passed into international law, the law of the sea. In respect of the matter pertaining to BBNJ, the trajectory is an open question, and it is yet to enter into force on New Zealand to ratify, and we may need new implementation legislation. Now I want to talk about where this is likely to bite, Mr. Chair. We have vessels, along with a host of other vessels, in the Southern Ocean. We don't have any vessels any longer operating out of New Zealand in the broader pelagic fishery. We do have a vessel from time to time in the Trans-Tasman waters, but this is more focused on those vessels extracting resource out of the high seas or indeed helping host nations. But in relation to the Southern Ocean, I'd remind ourselves that we have a lucrative fishery down there called the Patagonian toothfish. Look, it does bring people out in boils sometimes, but I love eating this stuff, and I've had numerous fillets over the years. And there have been ongoing calls for greater surveillance of our Kiwi vessels down there, and indeed the Navy goes down there and assists along with Australia to check the quality of the conduct. You may recall several years ago a vessel was chased all the way to Cape Town by the Australian Navy 6, 7, 8 years ago. And it's to the extent that we would have been in that position, these powers today give our government officials considerably more, less influence, but authority to chase those offenders. But if the offender has been flagged by another nation state such as Russia, the ultimate authority over that vessel lies with Russia.
Yes, thank you. Look, I thank the Minister for his comments and it's useful, useful commentary. Thank you. My question was one about grammar on page 24. Not so much about chasing ships around, and that is it's just the way that sentence reads. So this is at the top of page 24 and A, and it's a change made by the Select Committee. So it's, if they believe on reasonable grounds that the serious violation took place on the high seas, comma, on request of the vessel's flag state. So it's just whether that could be interpreted as meaning that the vessel's flag state wanted the serious violation to take place, as opposed to the vessel's flag state requesting the release of the vessel or the detention of the vessel. That's all I was asking about.
Look, several years ago, Mr Chair, the New Zealand Navy was involved in an incident during the time that Murray McCulley was the chair, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So we have had experience in this. And indeed, at this very point in time, there's a standoff between some of the Latin American states and fleets coming from Asia. At the end of the day, the ability, and I quote, I'm going to go right to where the Honourable Member is referring to, page 24, 113 UA, section 5A and B. The limits of our DG's authority is driven by the fact that of overarching significance is the law of the sea, where the ultimate authority does lie with the flag state nation. Now, in the event that we wanted to give ourselves more authority, if we felt that was a rogue nation ruining the sustainability of the fishery or interfering in a nefarious way with our relationships in the Pacific, I dare say that that solution doesn't lie in this Parliament. That solution lies in upgrading the agreements that all nations are a party to.
Mr Chairman, there's one issue that I would like to follow up with the Minister arising from his recent comments from the Chair. He, I thought, wisely said to the House that the future of New Zealand's, of the demilitarised nature of the South Pacific arises or is linked to the prosperity and success of Pacific Island nations, and that those Pacific Island nations will look to other nations that might seek to influence them. That was a relevant document, Mr. Minister.
Right, okay.
Those Pacific Island nations will look to other nations in respect of associations that might lead to the future militarisation of the Pacific, and a Pacific that is different to that which we currently experience. And the Minister, I thought, was referring in part to the necessary development assistance that comes into the Pacific Islands from Australia, the United States, New Zealand, Japan, the European Union, China and various other countries. The Minister will be aware that most USA aid programs have now been cancelled, funding withdrawn from them, and I know that his own leader, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who has quite a proud record of increasing development assistance into the Pacific under Labor-led administrations, was unsuccessful in current straitened times, even maintaining foreign aid at current levels into the Pacific. And I raised to the Minister an idea which I have floated, because I know the Minister of Defence, who was here very recently listening to this debate, has also had difficulty getting the money that she thinks is necessary to increase spending into hard power. So there's probably a need going forward to increase both hard power and soft power spending, and both are hard to get. So I refer the Minister to an idea in the document that he has now before them, that maybe the way to leverage both is to agree as a principle we need to lift both and tie lifts in one to the other. Because I think it would improve both the politics and the outcomes if we could, across this House, work together to lift expenditures in both of those areas. I know that there are disagreements across the House politically, but there's actually no disagreement really in respect of what we should be doing in the Pacific. And the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins is also on record as saying we need to replace the frigates, which implies an increase in military expenditure as a percent of GDP. So the question that I would ask the Minister is, have you given consideration whether, in addition to these sorts of illegal fishing measures, really the key to sustainable use of the fisheries is an increase in development assistance into the Pacific to help them fund a capital fleet, and maybe the idea that I've just put before him that you leverage one off the other so that you have as a principle that every increase in hard power expenditure is matched by an increase in soft power expenditure in diplomacy and overseas development assistance into the Pacific.
Honourable Shane Jones.
Thank you to the honourable member, and it's difficult to disagree. Just want to remind everyone, we generally are going to see these powers played out in the Pacific region when our military assets, such as they are deployed as a part of a collective effort. Recently, those efforts were called kurukuru, which means in Māori to strike. That's French, Kiwis, Aussies and Americans. It's beyond cavil. We need to do as much as possible. But there is a larger debate. How will we fund more surveillance and interventions? And that goes to the aid question. And to ensure that when we dress up aid under whatever title you want to call it, it's done in such a way that it's boosting the resilience of our friends and the governments of the Pacific, because they have options. And if they feel that what they're being offered is not actually enabling them to enjoy other resilience, this is not the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. We are regarded as a traditional donor. Other nations seeking to expand their influence in the Pacific, they're regarded as the new donors. The new donors are proving to be inordinately more pragmatic than the traditional donors, such as New Zealand.
Dr. Lawrence Zinan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister for responding to my previous question around BBNJ as well. Much appreciated. I'm going to move on to a new section, and I guess apologies to the Minister in advance, because I'm actually really enjoying hearing the Minister's response and also sort of the experience that the Minister has in this area. So to start with, I'm looking at section 29, section 113H replaced, which is around the issuing of the high sea fishing permit. And forgive my ignorance, feel free to direct me to additional readings or answer succinctly, but I wondered if when we are issuing a high sea fishing permit, is there a quota attached to that? Do you get quotas when you are fishing in high seas? It's an area I genuinely don't know. And I'm also curious because I see that one of the reasons that we are changing this particular section from high sea fishing permit to international fishing permit, because we are now including national fishery jurisdictions of a foreign country on top of just simply high sea. And I want to check with the Minister whether that's an indication of something we might potentially see in either future trade agreements as sort of built into a trade agreement of being the eligibility or the authority to be by the relevant foreign countries or trade partners to fish within their national jurisdiction, or alternatively, we're going to be seeing agreements on the line of the U.S. Tuna Treaty Annex 2, most recently, where we're going to be seeing some of these sort of agreements coming up. So, and just on the subject of quota, I also wanted to check in terms of, going back just a little bit in terms of Section 7, which is Section 35 amended. We're talking about the quota management system, and I want to check whether the definition of now the new definition of commercial fisher and the quota, is quota still transferable under the new definition, because one of the things we heard yesterday, for example, when we were debating the dairy bill, was that quotas aren't transferable, so you can't unsell the quota. So I want to just check with the Minister for clarity that quotas in the case of the QMS in the context of fishing quota is still transferable. So those are my sort of 3 questions around whether there is a quota for involved when they're looking at high sea fishing permit, whether we are going to be seeing more interactions or more inclusions of being able to fish in another country's national jurisdiction as part of this amendment, and also whether quotas are still transferable under the new definition.
Okay. Shane Jones. Right. New Zealand belongs to a host of regional fishing management organisations. Indeed, one of them set up in 2009-10 deals with a range of fisheries throughout the Pacific, including the mackerel off the coast of Chile, right through to the residual opportunities for boats to fish in the trans-Tasman waters. When a nation is entitled to extract a fraction of a defined fishery resource, their fraction, their quota, is under the auspices of what we call regional fishing management organisations. And yes, there is the ability for transferability of quota. That explains why, if I'm not mistaken, it's Chile who's ended up with an inordinately large degree of mackerel fishery beyond their sovereign entitlement, because it's been transferred from other nations who are highly unlikely ever to use it. And for those reasons, recently New Zealand had the opportunity to catch quota allocated to Australia. So that's the reference, but it does not take place under any other regime other than our participation in what are called RFMOs. On the question of international fisheries, international water fisheries, I want people to bear in mind something like the Ross Sea. That is where our Kiwi vessels are active. And these powers in the statute flowing from the Select Committee inquiry gives sharper authority and more certainty to the ambit of how our fisheries officials are able to police our own vessels and have a go at other vessels in the Ross Sea who undoubtedly are flouting regulations. However, at the end of the day, the capacity of Wellington to control that vessel depends on the flag state. And if the flag state, as happened in the days of Murray McCully, flips the bird, then our options lie at a higher court than this Parliament.
Miles Anderson. Mike Butterick, sorry, apologise.
I move that debate on this question now close.
The question is that debate on this question now close. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for. Clerk will conduct the party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Opposed from Green. 15 opposed.
Action New Zealand.
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
6 opposed.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 55. The question is agreed to. The question is that part 1 stand part. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we now come to part 2. Part 2, this is the debate of clauses 62 to 78, consequential amendments. The question is that part 2 stand part. Dr. Lawrence Nunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I understand that in part 2, we're looking at sort of some of the consequential amendment, and I want to just quickly address, and I think the Minister covered some parts of that in terms of the Search and Surveillance Act 2012, in terms of the schedule amended. Now, I know that there's certain parts of part 1 that talks about the operational elements of this, but I guess I'm curious to hear from the Minister, and again, this coming from a position of broadly ignorance in terms of this area, is when we are looking at inspections, etc., what sort of ability is there for a vessel to appeal or to, in terms of when they feel like that they are being searched inappropriately or accurately. So for example, I know there are certain parts of part 1 that talks about certain areas that shouldn't be searched. So I'm guessing that in terms of here, we are seeing under the schedule amended, so this is section 63, that there are certain sections that are exempted in terms of searching. But yeah, I want to know, is there a possibility for appeal process, is a possibility for a review process as a part of that general search? Thank you.
Very quick response. Members of the House, I want you to contemplate how rugged the conditions are on a number of these vessels that may or may not attract the attention of our officials. You are literally thousands of kilometres in some cases away from the nearest port. One of our new aircraft may have found something as a consequence of electronic monitoring that requires further investigation. They fly over. They then report this. It may come to pass that there's a naval vessel not too far away, or a Kiwi authorised person on another vessel operating out of the Pacific Islands. So this particular legislation gives clear authority to these benighted souls who have taken on this role to go on these largely Asian-owned vessels and check that their conduct is consistent with the rules and obligations of operating on the high seas. It is a perilous and dangerous job, both for the people condemned to work months on end on these small vessels, or indeed for our officers. It clearly identifies what they are able to do and how intrusive the search can be. But most of the time, these vessels are not Kiwi vessels. They derive their authority through a foreign flag. And it may not come to surprise you, as a surprise to you, that a lot of the foreign nations may very well resent this intrusiveness. So judgment will be required, but there'll be clear authority for our people to undertake these roles.
Steve Abel.
Yeah, thank you very much, Minister. And further to that question of the right of officers to inspect enter living quarters and conduct remote search, but particularly entering living quarters, there were questions on the committee around Bill of Rights issues, in terms of earlier parts of the bill as well, but also around this. What is your confidence and what gives you certainty that there are no Bill of Rights issues with, for example, entering the private quarters of a, somebody living in, I concur, at times, pretty miserable conditions on some of these vessels at sea. It has been well documented the slave-like conditions that some fishers are suffering on vessels in the Pacific and other parts of the world. But I wonder what consideration was given by you to the rights impact of fisheries officers being able to enter and board vessels in this manner. Thank you.
Honourable Shane Jones.
So, folks, for the legions of Kiwis following this fascinating debate, we're on page 33. We're on part 2, consequential amendments. We're on section 63, schedule amended. We're referring to 113UB, 113UC, and I direct the members' attention to the fact that these powers are conferred under the Fisheries Act. The Fisheries Act has a range of provisions already within that statute, originally passed, if I'm not mistaken, in the mid-1990s. So I'm confident that there will be no rogue operators exercising these powers, because these powers are now being embedded in a parent statute that already places limits on the capacity of the state to career around and make people's lives misery. This is likely to happen when a vessel comes into a port. It can possibly happen on the high seas, but this is likely to be the case when they're in a port like Majuro, when they're in a port in Kiribati Islands, when they're possibly in Honiara itself. This is where we imagine a lot of these checks after surveillance detects untoward behaviour takes place.
Dr. Lawrence Zenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, really appreciate the Minister for the responses and also sharing the Minister's expertise on this particular topic. I want to check again on this particular part, and feel free to give me very short answers. Does the Primary Act, in terms of that, when it comes to search and surveillance, also covers, for example, if the official, let's say in high seas or even potentially in a port, rather than seeing evidence of illegal fishing, but see elements of other potential crimes such as slavery or even human trafficking, as a part of that search and seizure, how do they then manage this uncovering some of those kind of elements? Because again, we've heard instances, and this is particularly right from Southeast Asia, when it comes to evidence of modern slavery. Does the Minister would the Minister be able to elucidate on whether the Primary Act also clearly defines that when that search and seizure powers does take place, that they have to be on very specific areas, and other areas that a person does notice will just have to be ignored, or they are admissible as evidence because not covered under the primary legislation? And I think further to that, the other question I have is, particularly like the Minister said, and I can only imagine like the tough and rough situations that people do have, when it comes to on the high seas. So when something like this does happen, and in search of search and surveillance, and temperature does run high, what sort of legal protection it is for any potential? Is there any legal protection for any criminal offences that does take place in that regard, as part of either this bill or the primary bill?
Yeah, so obviously New Zealand is a member to a variety of agreements, because we do stand against examples of international slavery in workplaces. And you may recall, other members may recall, 10 to 15 years ago there were an egregious set of cases associated with Korean flag vessels in New Zealand. So I don't need to recite that history, but it should remind people in this House that we have had a bit of experience in this regard. I think it's important to bear in mind that there is an international tribunal under the law of the sea, and if a foreign nation, or indeed our own nation, found that someone was creating problems and trying to obstruct and being unreasonable to our own flagged vessels down there in the Ross Sea, we have the ability as a nation owning the flag to protest and to challenge such inspections. So it's inevitable from time to time, whether it's New Zealand working with the Pacific, which are obviously very topical, that could be the case. But there is a dispute resolution process, and that's at the tribunal under the law of the sea.
David McLeod.
Is that debate on this question now closed?
The question is that debate on this question now closed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. A party vote has been called for. Clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
That's New Zealand.
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Party Māori.
6 opposed.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 55. The question is agreed to. The question is that part 2 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that the schedule stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we now come to our final debate, clauses 1 and 2. This is the debate on clauses 1 and 2, title and commencement. Dr. Lawrence Zenan.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Just a very quick question to the Minister on Section 2, on commencement date. I'm assuming that the Act is coming to force 6 months after royal assent to give time for preparation of some of the transition factors in this, but I just want to check with the Minister that the Minister is confident that 6 months is sufficient for that changes, that some of the changes are proposed in this bill.
Honourable Shane Jones.
I can assure you the bill's been through the necessary assurance processes with our MPI officials, and I have no doubt that they have arrived at a professional conclusion reflected in the statute.
Mike Butteret.
I move that debate on this question now close.
The question is that debate on this question now close. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Action New Zealand.
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
E ono ngā pōti e whakahe ana.
Yeah, I need to. Have we got a minister here?
The ayes are 68, the noes are 55. The question is agreed to. The question is that clause 1 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that clause 2 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I will report this bill without amendment.
The House is resumed.
Madam Speaker, the committee has considered the Fisheries, International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill and reports it without amendment. Madam Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the report be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The bill is set down for third reading immediately. Honourable Shane Jones.
Madam Speaker, I present a legislative statement on the Fisheries, International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill.
That legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website. Honourable Shane Jones.
I move that the Fisheries, International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill be now read a third time. I want to acknowledge that these legislative changes, Mr. Speaker, flow from a body of work undertaken by the Select Committee in a regime earlier than this one. They have come up with some sensible innovations and improvements. And why is it important? As I've already said, Mr. Speaker, fisheries has turned into a currency of influence in not only the Pacific, other parts of the world, but it's also been a vector for perfidy, where there have been problems that offend basic human rights, and New Zealand has sought over the last 10 to 15 years to upgrade its level of assistance and work more effectively with our neighbouring Pacific governments. These are international obligations that relate to illegal, underreported fishing, and the actual problem that we're trying to solve is that throughout our near neighbours, we have the Goldilocks zone of pelagic international fisheries. No group of nations have a more lucrative resource than our Pacific neighbours. Sadly, they struggle year after year to maximise the dividend or the return from this natural resource. Historically, it was dominated by the Americans. The Americans had an American tuna treaty, and that was used as a basis to meet the costs of gaining access to the fishery. And then a group of Kiwis, not the least of which is Mr. Les Clark from Christchurch, married to a Kiribati woman, they got together several years ago with the leaders of what's called the parties to the Nauru Agreement, and they created a collective of nations that decided to pool their political resource together, Mr. Chair, and that enabled them to introduce a scheme that it is illegal to fish in their sovereign waters unless you purchase days enabling you to fish commercially for a defined range of pelagic sea species. No days, no fishing. That then drove vessels to fish in the adjoining international waters, thus denying the nations of revenue and increasing the prospect of illegal, underreported fishing and a host of other illegal activities. So that is the problem that we're trying to solve, largely. Now, it is nations from Asia who dominate that fishery. The Americans have largely withdrawn from the fishery because they could not match the cost of buying a day to fish in sovereign waters of our Pacific neighbours. This is a very lucrative entitlement scheme of catching after you have paid for the days. This scheme has, however, led to a host of challenges, not the least of which is policing what the heck is happening and finding a way to be more intrusive when vessels come to shore, because the concept of transshipment at sea is now illegal in the vast majority of the Pacific nations. By that I mean the boats come alongside a big mothership and they supply them with groceries and various other services and goods, and then they put the fish on the large vessel. Now these things have to happen at shore. The changes that we have made through this legislation gives greater powers and helps us play a better role in working with our Pacific neighbours. It also gives authority and greater opportunities to police our own fisheries vessels, very modest in size. The final thing I'd like to say about this area is that we are in changing, volatile times when we look at our Pacific neighbours. And when we look at how we spend the money that we have under our MFAT budgets and what are we actually buying. Are we increasing the footprint of our influence? Are we putting conditions on our aid to ensure that the values that define us as New Zealanders are protected, extended and projected? These are matters of political debate, because often it's said you should just give aid without conditions. I do not believe that. I believe if the taxpayers of New Zealand are spending money in the Pacific, we need to be absolutely confident that the footprint of New Zealand, an open, liberal, transparent democracy, are not sidelined or marginalised. And we cannot have a situation where we're spending money and not advancing the interests of our own nation to ensure that the Pacific remains a peaceful, open, safe and secure environment. And this is the tipping point where we're at. Gone are the days where we could have a juvenile and naive view that everything we threw up there was going to lead to positive outcomes for New Zealand. We don't have that any longer, but these changes, Mr. Speaker, they do represent an improvement in the legal powers that we have. Obviously, I should acknowledge the members of the Primary Production Select Committee, the most enjoyable select committee that I ever sat on in my time since 2005. Acknowledge the work of the Parliamentary Council. They're extraordinarily busy. The MFAT officials, the Ministry of Trade, primary produce officials. And on that note, I'd like to thank all who have contributed to the bill, and I commend it to the House.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Labour Party endorses the comments made by the Minister and agrees that this bill is a useful contribution to New Zealand's help in the Pacific to enable them to both sustainably fish their fisheries so that the environmental baseline is maintained, but also to maximise the economic value they can achieve within those environmental limits. Responding to some of the Minister's comments about the more general propositions he made about aid into the Pacific, we agree that the prosperity and peacefulness of the Pacific Islands is of fundamental importance to New Zealand. It's important to our economic, our people-to-people, and also our security interests. The withdrawal of US aid does not help. Most of their programs have been cut, and it does mean that New Zealand partners like Australia are going to have to step up. And we need to do practical things, I agree, Minister, like enable affordable banking services, digital telecommunications, renewable electricity, sustainable resource utilisation, as we're doing here with fisheries, but I think there's a lot more to be done on that, as I addressed in the committee stage. And of course, we've got to help them with climate adaptation. Now, I agree that reciprocity is the key. I think we have to be a little bit careful that we're not completely zero-sum game here, because better educational, health and civil society outcomes are good for us all, and they have a value that ought not to be too transactional. But that said, I agree that reciprocity is the key to their prosperity and to our willingness to contribute. Now, we've got a couple of ideas out on that at the moment. We think we need a bit of a new framing to work with rising powers in the region, as well as the other Pacific countries, and we're interested in pursuing a Pacific peace zone, which might enable us to pursue those issues well in a way that meshes with New Zealand's traditional role in the Pacific relating to peace and denuclearisation, or the avoidance of nuclearisation. We also think it's clear that the decline in both soft and hard power spending in New Zealand has to be reversed. And we're actually still seeing declines in both, or particularly in recent. I don't want to politicise this too much. There's a long-term trend that has seen a decline, particularly in hard power expenditure, and a recent decline in soft power expenditure as a percentage of GDP too. Now, the split between hard power expenditure and military expenditure is always going to be, will need to be worked through. But we're out there on record today saying that we accept that increases to both are needed. We think a good principle to start with would be that for every dollar extra we spend in the military, we should be increasing our soft power spend as well. It doesn't. The cost of one frigate, you just about form a fisheries fleet in the Pacific. So, there are substantial increases of expenditure needed. The Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins, our leader, has said that we agree that the frigates need to be replaced, that it is fair for our partners to expect that they have military capabilities, and as the Minister has outlined today, some of the work they do in the Pacific is quite dangerous already in respect of some of these shadow fleets. So we accept that that's necessary. We accept that cooperation across governments will be necessary to achieve that. We make the point that the last frigates were purchased by a Labour administration. The upgrades to the P8s and the Orions were under a Labour coalition with support from New Zealand First and the Green Party. That there is a need also to change the way in which we defend ourselves through the use of drones and things, which I won't go into. But I think at the core of there is, in my opinion, a very, very sensible idea that it's hard to get political buy-in with people on these issues, and maybe we can leverage up both by saying we should link one to the other, because we actually need both for the reasons that the Honourable Shane Jones has already addressed. So, Mr. Speaker, can I end by thanking the Select Committee, because it was the Select Committee of this House that essentially led to this legislation, and the government officials as well as members of civil society who then saw it through. We commend this bill to the House.
Steve Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, it's a pity that I get the opportunity to acknowledge the excellent work of the officials on this bill after they've left the room, but I did want to acknowledge that because at the Select Committee, when we worked through it, there are a number of complexities. It certainly has the effect of strengthening the ability of inspectors and regulators to protect our oceans from the worst and most egregious actions of illegal, unregulated and unreporting fishing. That's why we're obviously supporting it. It's a good bill, and it's great to have another instance of cross-party support on this. And another instance in the space of 2 days of the Primary Production Committee having consensus on Best Committee on an act that is for the good of our collective good as a nation and indeed the entire environment of the ocean. The Minister spoke about the opportunity for economic benefits to the Pacific from a healthy fishery. I suppose in a sense the Green Party comes at it from the other way around, which is to say that when we have a thriving ocean ecology, we also have a thriving fishery that can then feed people and sustain people. And the starting point is that we protect the integrity of that ecology. Those magnificent benthic environments, those seafloor environments where we get these magnificent ancient coral forests, actually are a hub of ecological intensity. This is where the likes of orange roughy feed and exist. Around those environments you get a diversity of species. It's sort of like in shallow waters when you have a marine protected area, Mr. Speaker, you get an abundance of fish, and it ends up being for the benefit of those areas outside of that marine protected area where fishing is still permitted. So by protecting, in the first instance, the health of the ecology of our ocean, we also protect the fishery. It is concerning to us in the broader scheme of things that rightly we are taking a clear position on illegal, unregulated and unreported fishing that is consistent with our commitment to international obligations in the oceans. We have to, and we had a very clear message from the officials on this, it is part of our broader principle of being part of the community of nations that take a care to look after the oceans, and that we really needed to come up to speed where other nations were on this challenge, these serious challenges in as the Minister rightly points out, that wild and vast blue world that we live on. It is very challenging to deal with. He called them the mosquitoes, but the multitude of vessels out there that are doing things out of sight, out of mind. In that frame, Mr. Speaker, it is hard for us to not refer to our concerns about this government's failure to entirely be consistent on that front. I'm thinking of the South Pacific Regional Fisheries Management Authority, SPRIFMO, where New Zealand, under this government, under this regime and this minister, has backed out of previous commitments we made to uphold things like protecting those hugely valuable seamounts from destructive fishing. The sort of things that happen in those seamounts are things that are done by illegal vessels, but often if we haven't got very clear jurisdictions that state clearly that that particular benthic environment is out of bounds, then we cannot enforce the idea of illegal fishing because it hasn't been designated yet as illegal. New Zealand needs to do both ends of the equation. We need to be part of international agreements to make sure that we do protect the integrity of those most valuable ecosystems at sea. It is also hard in the context of where we are in time to not reflect on the recent voyage of Greenpeace out on a ship to have a look at what is going on in the deep. I note from a recent email that they said, we saw the beauty of thriving underwater communities, including deep-sea corals that support a myriad of ocean life. We also saw the absolute destruction caused by bottom trawling. After even years of campaigning to protect seamounts and coral, seeing hour after hour of destroyed coral on this scale was a shock. This is information that's just been garnered in the last few days, in the last couple of weeks. Coral is absolutely crucial to ocean health. When bottom trawlers drag heavy nets over the seafloor, they turn coral forests into rubble. We know that what comes up in the nets is just a tiny indication of what has been destroyed on the seafloor, and recently we have had instances of rare and protected coral species being trawled up in New Zealand fishing nets. Seeing both the destruction and the beauty reminded me how important it is to protect seamounts and the coral that live on them. We couldn't express support for that statement more strongly, Mr. Speaker. This legislation before us is part of a very important context in terms of the ocean, and part of where we as a nation need to be stepping more forthrightly and more determinedly to ensure that we do protect that absolutely precious ocean ecology that makes up most of the Earth's surface. Mr. Speaker, it is always a pleasure when we are able to sit on a committee and work through an agreement on a piece of legislation like this that does protect the commons, that benefits all of us, not just those of us who are directly associated with it in our exclusive economic zone, but also that broader those international waters that we are all responsible for being the caretakers of, because they are, in a sense, something that belongs to no one. They belong to all of us, therefore. And so this is an instance of where we have a piece of legislation that allows us as people to step up to that greater duty of being caretakers for our brief time on this planet of this magnificent ecology that we enjoy to live amongst and be part of as human beings. And I commend this bill to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Laura McClure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill on its third reading. I think, firstly, all of us in this House can acknowledge the abundance that the Pacific offers and its potential for our very vulnerable Pacific Island nations. The seafood industry is one of their key core assets, and it's something that they hold really dearly to their heart. And this bill, while it enables more powers for us to search vessels, for example, and to search for that illegal fishing, it also offers us a bit of an insight into other things that are happening out in the Pacific. And I think some of the discussion that we've been hearing today in the Committee of the Whole House and bits and pieces that I've been picking up on, it's quite nice to hear that actually some of the opposition, particularly Labor, have actually come out in support of some of the things that we need to do within the Pacific as far as where we're putting our financial aid. Are we getting value for money? Are we actually helping our Pacific Island nations with the things that they actually really want and need to thrive in order for us to make some of our gains back, our political influence that we have lost over the last few years? And I think that's really important. So it's also good to hear that they also agree to an increase in GDP spending for defence. And I think this side of the House would be pretty proud and happy to see that. And I also think for New Zealand as a whole, this signals that actually this government and the opposition see that our national security is a huge priority for us here, a tiny island nation at the bottom of the planet. We cannot find this more important to make sure that we shore up our Pacific. So this has been well traversed, and we all know this is a really good bill, and I'm really grateful to see everybody is supporting this, and I commend this bill to the House. Thank you.
Sue's Redmayne.
This bill is about being a trusted and responsible global trading partner, and it's about protecting the long-term interests of our vital fishing industry, and I am very proud to commend this bill to the House.
Nā koe, e te pika.
Takuta Ferris.
Tēnā tātou. E tuana hau ki te waha i ngā kōrero o te Pāti Māori, mo te pire nei, me ona kaupapa atu i te iwi Māori. So illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing is obviously something you've got to combat, because fish are a finite resource, and we've learnt that many times in this country. So we support it in that regard. The protection of international waters and international species is a key thing to our local species. They're never separated. A tuna that swims down from Tonga is just as important as a kahawai caught down at the harbour. These are all lessons that are often lost in these sorts of conversations. So the knock-on effect is key in this discussion. And this year, actually last year, October last year, here's a real good knock-on effect thing. That's classic example in New Zealand. We've had one of the best yellowfin tuna seasons in this country in 10 years or 15 years. This year, yellowfin tuna everywhere, from Manawatafi, from the Three Kings, all the way to the Cook Strait. Unprecedented. Where the heck did all those tuna come from? Well, tell you what happened. They stopped all that tuna wrangling up in the Pacific. So we haven't seen, the game fishermen in this country haven't seen a run of tuna for more than 10 years. So the protection of international waters has a knock-on effect to our local waters. And those two things are as important as each other. So I'm a bit confused, a bit bemused at the extreme attention that the Minister is paying to protecting and regulating international waters when he's happy to deregulate local waters. Those two things are the same thing. So if you're going to do one in one place, do it in the other one. And our species in fishing, despite all of the hoo-ha over the QMS over the years, I can rattle you off 10 species that were deemed so numerous they would never disappear, that guess what? Almost disappeared. Here's one of them, one of the most numerous coastal fish, kahawai. When it was opened up to purse seine netters, nearly vanished. The good old kahawai that everyone can go and catch. So they're not separate issues is what I'm saying. Yet we've got two separate approaches. I can't work that out. Me, I'm a fisherman and a diver. My father, fisherman diver. My uncles, fisherman divers. My grandfathers, fisherman divers. My great-grandfathers, fisherman divers. We've been watching these coasts, fishing them, using the resources for generations and generations. We understand all this stuff. It's not hard. It gets confusing when people stand around talking about it, all bits and pieces of it, this thing, that thing, the other thing, international, local. It all amounts to nothing if you can't feed your whānau in your own rohe, moana. So, where's it all heading, Where's it heading? It's got to be heading somewhere. And it needs to be heading to a place where they're all looked after as a total. You can't separate them out and say, oh, we're going to regulate over here, but you know what, we're going to let that bottom trawling continue. It's ludicrous. And our country deserves better. Te iwi Māori deserves better, but our country deserves better. So, and also, just to pick up on Steve Abel's point, you can't ignore climate change. The unprecedented run of yellowfin tuna in this country was matched this year by a more unprecedented run of marlin in the southern oceans. I'm talking about marlin south of Taranaki. There were about 10 marlin caught on the Kapiti coast. There have been a massive run of marlin caught in the South Island on the west coast, in Westport, and marlin caught in Kaikoura. These are unprecedented things. Never in the history of anyone counting fish has this happened. And as I said, I'm a diver. I dive Kapiti Island a lot. Last weekend, we saw the first ever blue mau at Kapiti Island. I don't know what to say, really, other than, if I get back to the drive of the minister, how can he expect the international community to take us seriously when he still allows bottom trawling? That's right. We're one of 7 countries in the world, whānau, one of 7 in the world who allow legal bottom trawling. How can he do that? How can he expect the local people to take him seriously when he goes on national TV and openly says that the Maui dolphin doesn't exist? that it's actually just a small hectares. There you go. There's the Dole people over there. And if that's what he believes, then perhaps he should immediately lift the ban on set netting currently on the entire west coast of the North Island because of the Maui dolphin. If it is indeed a ghost dolphin, lift the ban. Kia ora tātou.
Dr. Lawrence Zunan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just waiting until the mic actually kicks in. Any stage? Or not? There we go. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of the Green Party to also support the Fisheries, International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill. And like many speakers have mentioned before, this is one of those bills that has the broad, the House's overall unanimous support. And again, thank you to the Primary Productions Committee for examining this particular bill, and also to the previous minister as well under the Labour government for introducing this bill in the first place. So when it comes to this bill, understandably, this is to do with international fishing, and it's specifically around illegal, unreported, and unregulated IUU fishing. And there are various mechanisms that are in this particular bill that is aimed to address some of these issues, as well as quality of life changes to areas, for example, such as expanding the high seas fishing permit to more broadly international fishing permit to include potentially authorities to fish in other countries' national jurisdiction. So as part of the committee stage, it was actually incredibly enlightening. And I would like to thank the Minister for being very open in terms of his response, but also in terms of his broader experience in this area. And other things that we did touch on in terms of the committee stage are around things like surveillance. And I think the Honourable Dr. David Parker raised the really important questions, and some really important questions around, it's great that we have some of these, but what happens if a vessel goes dark? What happens if we aren't able to see whether there is IUU activities taking place? But broadly speaking, I want to kind of address a couple of additional things that other members have spoken on. And I want to first address in terms of our broader responsibility as Aotearoa in the Pacific region. Now, we have heard in terms of the need for defense spending and all of those, but I think from a Greens perspective, we maintain on what is the value of that for our Pacific neighbors in light of much greater issue in our communities at this stage, and what honestly our Pacific neighbors are asking us to do, which is to address climate change. And that is one of the top priorities for them is, in light of climate change and the issue of climate mitigation, but also climate adaptation. Look, Mr. Speaker, we can't outshoot the US and we can't outspend China. So when we are looking at our defense spending of going up to 2% of our GDP, which equates to $10 billion, exactly what are we actually going to be spending on in a stage we're also seeing cuts to the defense forces and not actually sponsoring the core facilities and infrastructure that we all need, such as education and health and etc. But to bring it back to this bill, one of the other things that we did manage to talk about quite substantively is how this interact with other potential international instruments and agreements. And I really want to use this opportunity to also talk about the fact that we have signed, but also in the process of eventually ratifying and implementing the agreement on marine biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, or BBNJ. And this sets supposedly the pathway for us to do what the Global Oceans Treaty is meant to do, which is protect 30% of our ocean. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that many people agree that although we have these demarcated zones as EEZ, and this belongs to this country and this belongs to this country, but our natural environment and our biodiversity, our marine animals, do not see those borders. They do not factor in those borders when they are traveling through our open seas. So the way that Dr. Ferris has mentioned, in the sense that we have addressed some of these things in international waters, but not so much in domestic waters, doesn't make a lot of sense in this case. And also just a reminder to the House that New Zealand is actually still the only nation in the Pacific that bottom trawls in the South Pacific High Sea, which is an embarrassment for us. Lastly, I just want to say that in this particular agreement, this also gives acknowledgement to traditional knowledge and indigenous people. So Mataranga Māori is important for us, and we look forward to this.
Mike Butterick.
This bill helps us meet our international obligations, and importantly, it actually maintains our international reputation. Noting our commitment to being a leader in sustainability of our fisheries and including in international waters. This reputation is quite critical to maintain our access to our export markets, so that that export income can contribute to this government's goal of doubling export by value over 10 years, so that New Zealanders can benefit with increased job opportunities, enablement of better infrastructure, and ultimately putting more money in the back pockets of all New Zealanders. I commend this bill.
Tangi Utikiri.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Labor supports this bill. The reason for that is because we introduced it into the House. So of course we're going to support it. Mr Speaker, this is important so that we're able to enforce and strengthen enforcement in the areas of illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. And we also do need to align what is very strong and clear international practice in this space, and that's what this bill does. Mr Speaker, it is disappointing though that this is being progressed under urgency. And the reason why I say that is because we've just come hot off the heels of a committee stage where questions were put to the Minister in committee, and it's rather disappointing that the Minister didn't respond to any of the questions that I'd put to him. And on this side of the House, you know, we were not seeking to be obstructive around this. We support this bill, we want it to pass, but we want it to be good, clear legislation. And the questions that were put to the Minister were in an effort to achieve exactly that. So it is disappointing that we are in urgency and that the Minister has decided not to play ball in the sense of giving constructive feedback or even answering or addressing any of the questions. So that is a concern, but I guess that's what you get from the government seeking to progress legislation under urgency, noting that this is a bill that has been on the order paper actually, sir, for quite some time. So it is disappointing in that respect. Despite that though, when we step back and look at this bill, it is one that does give you know, a real sense of achievement around reducing the gap between what the existing legislation is and what is good practice in terms of our responsibilities as a country. It is a bill that bases itself on the tenets of accountability and scrutiny, and so it is certainly our desire and hope that the bill will deliver on that. I commend this bill to the House.
Paolo Garcia.
Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to a strong domestic framework against illegal fishing. Illegal fishing in the southern and Pacific seas, oceans, impact on our own fishing industry, and we must do all we can to prevent illegal fishing. I commend this bill to the House.
5 minute split call, Glenn Bennett.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker, and as my colleagues already, the Honourable David Parker and Tangi Utikiri have made clear, Labor does support this legislation, and the reason we do is because it's the right thing to do, but also because it was a piece of legislation that Labor and government back in 2023 did introduce to this House. So it is appropriate to support it. But it's also appropriate to support it because if we maintained the status quo, New Zealand would become an outlier in terms of this space, in terms of ensuring that we strengthen our ability to manage the fisheries and to enforce the rules to prevent illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. So it's good for us. It's good for the Pacific, and I commend this to the House.
David McLeod.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Similar to the last presenter from the other side of the House,
This bill brings New Zealand up to the international expectations to meet our obligations. It focuses on our trading partners, it focuses on our Pacific neighbours, and it helps, most importantly, our ocean environment and our fish stocks. I'm happy to commend the bill to the House.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it is good to be speaking on this third reading of a bill that, as I mentioned earlier, was once in my name. And I cannot claim to have done an awful amount of work on it when I was the Minister. I was able to have it introduced, but it is the work, as we've heard from many officials over many years and many people who have been very much involved in seeing the importance of international law around this shared resource, which is our oceans. So I want to commend all of those people who have done that work and had the foresight to see how international regulations is important. And there are some heckles coming from the other side of the House that I have to even congratulate the current Minister for shepherding this through the House. And I do believe in the committee stage of the House, I thanked the Minister a number of times for his comments in the committee stage, and I do think it is good that he has continued with this piece of legislation. And I don't know if there needed much convincing for the other parties. They've all been in joining in harmony of support for this bill, so I commend all of them who are doing that. Also, do want to though note that some of our very small, precise questions were not answered in the committee stage, and that is a problem, as is running that committee stage into the third reading all at the same time in urgency. In urgency where we were, people were in the House till midnight last night, we're in the select committees at 8 o'clock this morning, and there might be mistakes made. I'm simply talking about good legislative processes to those members opposite. And I can say it is a lot more efficient, if this government is interested in efficiency, to have a little bit of time to make sure that questions raised do not identify problems that could be easily fixed by going back into the committee stage, rather than passing a bill, having it commence, and then having to come back to amend it if that is indeed the case. Just bit of good process helps with efficiency. I'll try and end on a more cheery note, and that it is very excellent that all parties are agreed about the importance of this international law and the importance of regulating illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Just before I call the next speaker, I think it's very good that members are looking after the ego and self-esteem of their minister, which is clearly needs to be looked after. So I commend him for that. Rima Nakale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to be the lucky last speaker on this, the third reading of the Fisheries, International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill, and essentially this bill, as we've heard traverse around the House today, is amending the Principal Act of the Fisheries Act 1996, so that Aotearoa, New Zealand can better meet its international fishing management obligations in a more efficient way. And with that, Mr. Speaker, since we're so good here on this side of the House with efficiency, I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
Fisheries, International Fishing and Other Matters Amendment Bill, third reading.
That concludes the business of urgency. Congratulations to all involved. The House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. today.